Good morning and welcome to the Intelligent Community Forum webinar. I'm Susan Stanford, Executive Lead for the Ministry of Citizen Services for the province and co-moderator for this morning. I'm joined by John Jung, Executive Director of the Intelligent Community Forum Canada. John will be leading the majority of our discussion. But before we begin, I'd like to recognize that there is a diverse group of individuals, organizations, and local governments that are pursuing digital opportunities in all corners of our province, many of whom are online this morning. For some, this is the beginning of a dialogue on realizing a digital opportunity for your community. And for others, it's the next stage of unleashing economic and social and environmental benefits from your digital investment, or maybe a combination of both. My office leads connectivity and digital infrastructure initiatives for the province. We are focused on creating an environment where every British Columbian can affordably access internet services and every community can build the digital infrastructure they need to fully participate in today's digital economy. Digital inclusion is a key opportunity and a provincial commitment. This means we need to ensure digital opportunities flow to women, First Nations, and Indigenous and low-income individuals who might otherwise struggle to fully participate in our digital world. The newly launched Federal Smart Cities Challenge program is an opportunity to attract federal investment for digital transformation at the community level. This afternoon's webinar is an opportunity to hear directly from federal program leads on how to construct a winning proposal for the Smart City Challenge program. This morning's webinar is a broader look at the SMART approach to digitally transforming a community for success in a digital world. This is our time to hear about real examples that may inform your personal or proposal to the challenge and provide an opportunity to engage in a dialogue about a BC approach to becoming a smart community. Today, the cost of distance has all but disappeared, making global markets more accessible. And adopting new, cost-effective, digital and connected services in our communities is an imperative. Young people are seeking to live and raise their families in affordable, caring, and connected communities closer to nature. And globally, people see BC as a safe place to travel and live. In this context, all BC communities have the opportunity to move from the periphery of the digital economy and benefit from improved healthcare, education, public safety, and a cleaner and healthier environment. There are countless examples from around the world, and right here in BC, of what it takes to digitally reinvent a community from the inside out, to create tangible benefits that attract and retain people and talent. Over the next few hours, John will help us explore what digital reinvention looks like, what it means to be a smart community and the possibilities for BC, how communities digitally reinvent themselves, the value of collaboration within and among communities, and how the roles we each play in accelerating the benefits. I look forward to the discussion and working together with you all. John, over to you.
Well, thank you, Susan, and good morning, everyone. We're very pleased to work with the British Columbia government in providing this webinar, which we've called Smart Communities, a primer on how BC communities can leverage the smart revolution. Before I pass this on to Professor Gallardo and later on to ICF's Robert Bell and the panelists, let me just take a moment to introduce the Intelligent Community Forum and the Canadian affiliate called ICF Canada. ICF, also known as the Intelligent Community Forum, is both a think tank and a global network of cities, towns, and regions all over the world. Together, we explore, inspire, and work with communities to leverage information and communications technologies, especially broadband and its disruptive applications, as well as its analytic data to help to transform communities, build economic prosperity, solve social challenges, make their communities more livable, and enrich cultures. We focus on people, but recognize that smart and advanced technologies enables these things to happen. ICF also publishes books and white papers, organizes conferences and workshops, helps communities to accelerate their transformation through exploring case studies, benchmarking, and strategic programs. ICF also holds an annual awards program and has developed national organizations and institutions for the study of smart cities and intelligent communities worldwide. ICF's been doing this work for over 2 decades and has qualified nearly 170 cities, towns, and regions as Smart 21 cities and intelligent communities, from small rural communities to large metropolitan areas. ICF Canada was created to service and work closely with a growing number of Canadian communities, now totaling 37, that have passed along the ICF journey over the years. We welcome all the communities listening today to make an application and join the growing ICF global family of Smart 21 cities and intelligent communities. More information on this can be found on the ICF website. So finally, some housekeeping before we move on. Our website is sold out. We have a very large number of attendees on the webinar. Hence, all attendees will be in listen-only mode, but they will all be able to ask questions by typing them into the questions panel on the side. We are recording the webinar and will make it available on the ICF and ICF Canada's website, as well as with the BC government. If you require technical support, please note the numbers on your screen. And now for our keynote presentation, a rural masterclass. Professor Gallardo is Assistant Director of the Purdue Center for Regional Development, and he's a Purdue Extension Community and Regional Economics Specialist. Dr. Gallardo has worked with rural communities over the past decade, conducting local and regional community economic development, including use of technology for development. He's been the author of more than 70 articles regarding rural trends, socioeconomic analysis, industrial clusters, the digital divide, and leveraging broadband applications for community economic development. He's also the author of a book called Responsive Countryside, the Digital Age and Rural Communities. Professor Gallardo, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for coming in. I know that you were just finishing up a class at Purdue, and now you are available for this this presentation of your rural masterclass. Professor Gallardo, you can take over from now.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. Good afternoon. That was a lovely introduction. I'm going to talk to you kind of from a very basic primer perspective, and I'm going to share with you some of the stuff that I've seen communities do. The overall objective requires a change in mindset. That's what I've seen time and time again, and the Intelligent Community Framework is an awesome, very useful framework that can be used to accomplish this. So we're going to start. I'm going to share with you some stats and other stuff about the digital age, kind of to set the stage. And then again, towards the end, I'm going to talk about some case studies, and then we're going to have some Q&A from the audience. So what's going on right now, as you can see in that slide, is phenomenal. To reach 100 million users worldwide, it took the telephone 75 years. And Pokemon Go, it took only 1 month. So technology adoption is the fastest we've seen in human history. So this is having a great repercussions on our socioeconomic landscape. So as a small rural community, you can be part of this as long as you are aware of it and you plan accordingly. So here's an image that I use a lot that shows, the top image shows the Vatican when Pope John Paul II died. And then 8 years later, it's when Pope Francis was elected and was about to give his first speech. You tell me what's the difference between those two images. I think it's pretty much striking. That explains why Pokemon Go, it took only 1 month for 100 million users to be using that application. So again, the landscape is changing and changing dramatically, but there are ways to make sure that your community can adapt. So these are some numbers that are just very good to put it into perspective. The key message here is that the economic pie is increasing, and so the question becomes how much of that pie will go to your communities. Again, it doesn't matter necessarily that you're not a big urban area, as long as you have the mindset and plan accordingly. So take, for example, the impact of the Internet of Things. If everything works out, which there are multiple issues, but if everything works out, the IoT alone can contribute up to $11 trillion to the U.S. economy per year starting in 2025. So that's 7 years away. And with this IoT, everything working out means, okay, are these silos data sets talking to each other? We're going to need a lot of programming and a lot of data analyses and building sensors and deploying them, and all that can take place in your community as well. But do you want to be part of it? Again, that's the question. The number one threat to all of this is that down at the bottom is in red. It's called the digital divide. And you will hear more and more about this. It basically means those that do not have access, cannot afford it, or do not have the expertise or the know-how to leverage the technology. So that's really going to be the issue of our time. So here, the digital age is not agreed upon among researchers. We're still debating what it is and when it started and all stuff, but we have identified 4 characteristics. The first one is that it is exponential. This is the typical exponential graph. In case you're not any math or number people, this is an exponential graph, and it's population, a global population. It shows how it starts really, really slow, and then it hits an inflection point, and then it shoots up. That's the exponential perspective, that even though it may start really slow, when it accelerates, it really accelerates. So you can see here with population growth, that has happened with digital technology, and it is one of the characteristics of the digital age. And please remember this graph, its overall pattern, because you're going to start seeing that more and more these days. So here's an example of that exponential growth only on computer chips, okay? So the mighty 1971 Beetle would have reached 300,000 miles per hour if it would have improved as computer chips did up to 2015. It would have a fuel economy of 2 million miles per gallon, and it would only cost 4 cents. That is why your smartphone in your pocket has more computational capability than all of NASA did back in '69 when Armstrong set foot on the moon. So that is very powerful. Many communities overlook that fact that we now have a very powerful computer in our pockets. So that's one of the exponential behaviors. This has been shown to, or it has appeared in the hardware side of things, but now we're getting into the software part of things that is starting to show this pattern as well. So another characteristic is that obviously it's all digital, the Internet of Everything, or the Internet of Things. You know, it's the physical world can now be digitized, monitored, measured, and optimized. At least 50 billion devices will be connected in 2 years, according to Cisco. That's a lot of devices, and that means not only your sensors on your smartphone, but also your social media posts. It means all the sensors that go into engines and manufacturing and cars and all that stuff. So imagine the amount of data that's going to be generated. So this leads us to our third characteristic, which is combine. The digital age is known to combine a lot of previous technologies. That has happened across human history, but this time, because of the amount of data that we have and how connected we are, that really can allow us to find things that we didn't know existed, to identify patterns, to do a lot of things. And just like everything that was, mechanized was electrified and fortunes were made and quality of life changed, the same will be that anything that is electrified is cognified, which leads us to artificial intelligence. Deep learning algorithms and all those applications on the software side that are now evolving as quickly and in exponential behavior as did hardware. So the fourth characteristic of the digital age, and the last one, is disruption. You notice the dark blue line is Amazon, and the lighter blue is Walmart. Can you tell me what pattern do you observe on that Amazon graph? It's exactly almost the same as that population exponential graph. Once it hits an inflection point, it moves, and it moves quick. And that's going to happen. So if you and your community are planning to ride it, just wait a little bit and see how things turn out and everything, and you play to catch on, the odds are that you may not ever catch on, because things will move quickly and are moving quickly. So here's another example of disruption or decentralization. It took Airbnb 4 years to reach 600,000 rooms, while it took the Hilton hotel chain 93 years. That's again exponential behavior, but also decentralizing. Rural Airbnb hosts here in the US increased 1,800% between over the past 5 years, 1,800%. Now, you may not make a full living out of that money, but it does certainly help to have that money from these types of applications that were just unheard of 10 years ago. So here's another big disruption is manufacturing. The blue line shows manufacturing output or productivity. The red line shows manufacturing jobs. And the gray bar in the back shows the number of jobs needed to generate a 1 million manufacturing output. Back in 1980, you needed almost 25 people to generate 1 million. By 2015, you need 6. So if your community is the one that has an industrial park and is waiting and hoping to land a mid-sized manufacturing, you can continue to pursue that. But then if you do land that manufacturing facility, do you have the workers and the skills needed to manage that Industry 4.0 facility? So you can see that that's been disrupted as well. So for the first industrial revolution, 3 things converged from an economic perspective: communication, energy, and transportation. When the right pieces converge, then we have an explosion or development. That happened with the telegraph, with coal and railroad. For the second industrial revolution, we have the TV, the radio, then we have oil, and then we have an internal combustion engine, and we saw what happened with those converged at the mid 1900s. Then we have the third one. Others call it the fourth. It really varies, but they're speaking about the same thing. You have internet, you have energy that's being decentralized, microgrids, blockchain controlling who's putting what into the network energy-wise, and transportation. These are just converging. We are in the diaper stage now. That is why we've got to plan for this, because it is here and it is coming. And the argument is that it will end up developing and increasing quality of life, just like the previous 2 did 100 and 200 years ago. So digital globalization is really a result of this. Again, it's a teenager. It's 15 years old. 15 years old. And it now has a larger impact on GDP than 100 years old goods trade. Okay. And it's only a teenager. Why? Because now mostly anybody that has the connectivity and the know-how can, do startups and participate in this increasing pie. So the question again is your community part of this increasing pie? Are you taking proactive steps to accomplish this? So here you can see, again, innovation is changing as well. There are some books that argue that the digital age is also affected by the clusters and agglomeration characteristics of the industrial age. But here we can see that innovation is really on steroids. It took from 9,000 BC to when the agricultural revolution occurred to mathematics invented. It took 7,000 years. Let me repeat that, 7,000 years. Then we hit an inflection point and look at all the series of innovations that occurred within decades. So, and look at that graph again. What pattern do you see? So innovation is changing. The nature of innovation is changing. All human beings are creative by nature. So if you plug into this digital universe, you don't necessarily have to be in Silicon Valley or New York City to be innovative. You can be mostly anywhere. So another example, crowdfunding, you've heard about. This was the report from Kickstarter. 169 countries participated in its first 100,000 successful projects, 86,000 proposals or creators, 9 million backers. And here's the key thing I want to highlight. 2,300 miles was the average distance between a creator and a backer. 2,300 miles. So that means that if you have something that is really innovative, or you have a social issue, but you are somewhat limited because you're not dense enough, crowdfunding can help. So again, this helps with this decentralization characteristic. Because if you keep in mind, here in the U.S. at least, funding for rural is decreasing and decreasing fast. About a third of rural counties do not have a bank. A third, 33%. So you can see there why, again, but if your community is not leveraging this technology because you don't have that mindset, then you're being left behind. Here is education. Badges is becoming a big, huge thing. This now has expired to apply for this scholarship from Google, but it could be taken online, and the jobs that are associated with this type of work more than likely are telework friendly. So you don't have to move to Silicon Valley. You can get certified online by Google, and then you get employed by Google. So when back in the day, it was only a dream for you to accomplish this, which leads me to the next slide, which is telework. That's a huge, if you ask me, this one and the next slide are the killer apps of broadband that we have been eluding for many years. I think that's going to transform the landscape, and it's going to really change the conversation about broadband is telework and telehealth. So here, the other application that's coming that's going to change, let me give you a little bit of background. Do you remember the green screens that you had to type in text commands to engage with a computer? That was in the 1970s. Then we come up with the 1980s and Windows. That's, do you remember when Windows started, right? That's how we got to interact better, and it drove adoption and made it easier. You didn't have to type these green letters into the computer. That was in the 80s. Then in the 2000s, we're tapping away on our cell phones and everything, right? We're just tapping. Adoption continues to increase as more users hop in, then more users come online and more innovations, et cetera, et cetera. What's next is mixed reality. That's going to totally change workforce development, education, healthcare, and just social connectivity. It's going to put it on steroids, and that's already here. It's happening, but the disclaimer for this is please do not attempt with a DSL connection because it's not going to go very well. So another question I get a lot from rural communities, I hope it's not, none of you have this argument, is do I need faster internet, right? Maybe my Netflix will load a little bit faster, but why? I mean, is it worth the investment? Of course it is, because it's like asking, do I need electricity when I already use candles? Nobody knew what electricity would bring, and only now are we starting to see the beginning of what broadband can bring. So yes, it is worth the investment, but again, you've got to shift the mindset, which is another big issue. 2/3 of new jobs created between 2010 and 2016 in the US required medium to high digital skills, aside from the actual job skills. So it's having a transformation in the workforce as well. So again, back to that graph, if your rural community is still interested in attracting manufacturing, make sure that your workers have the digital skills, because if not, that ties to the knowledge workforce indicator of ICF, which I'm going to discuss shortly. A changing workforce, the same point. By 2025, in 7 years, there will be 1 billion with a B digital natives that will join the workforce. This will change dramatically. By then, if mixed reality really takes off, it's going to change everything. You can be working and just co-working with people in your office in London and in Taiwan, wherever, and you're in your living room. And so that has tremendous implications. But from an employer perspective, you've got to be aware that this generation interacts differently just because of the technology they have at hand. So you've got to be open-minded and make sure that you can accommodate as far as you can these digital natives, because otherwise you're going to be without workers. There was an article in the Financial Times last year that showed that a lot of Japanese companies are going out of business because they don't have workers. So keep that in mind. And of course, change. Change is not easy. It takes time, especially in rural communities, and change is painful. However, progress does not occur without change. So first and foremost, your community needs to go and shift from an industrial age mindset to a digital age mindset. That is very important, because if you do not make this change, then you will not have meaningful discussions, and then it will be hard for you to make this transition to the digital age, and you will be left out. And a very useful way to accomplish this change is through the ICF framework. So as you know, they have 6 indicators. 4 of them are what could be considered traditional economic development, but then there are 2 that when included into the mix, do provide a different lens on which to look your community. So with the communities I've worked with, for example, regarding broadband, they were a population 2,200. They developed deployed a fiber to the home model, but they needed pre-sign-ups for them to build it out. Well, the mayor partnered with churches, and they targeted kids. They targeted the children so they could then harass their parents about the technology. And guess what? That town beat all other towns that were in that same system that were better socioeconomically speaking. So does your community partner with the providers in increasing awareness of what the community can bring? That's very, very important. Knowledge workforce, as I've mentioned, I've seen communities that partner with their NGOs, and they come up with iPads and Scratch Junior and other apps to teach kids how to do this, how to start playing, making cartoons, but they're actually learning how to code. But more importantly, they're securing, or they're solidifying this digital age mindset. Also, other communities that do look at millennials and are trying to attract them, and they've made pretty good efforts to make it walkable, and sidewalks and path and bicycle paths and all that stuff. That's also very important. Advocacy is also critical. I've seen communities that partner with universities to manage their online reputation. It's baby steps. I'm not guaranteeing that you will become the next Silicon Valley or Amazon, but you have very creative people in your community. But when people Google your community, what does it show up? So these are, again, baby steps. This program was very popular, and many communities are now proactively managing their online reputation. Innovation-wise, as I mentioned, it's changing. But when I talk about innovation in this perspective to these small communities, I really more talking about: do you have an app to interact with your citizens? Do you have a website? Do you have a social media presence? Anything that can be done online, is it being done online, or are you kind of forcing your residents, especially millennials, to stand in line? That's not going to earn you brownie points. So those are type of the innovations that I really truly talk about. And then it goes from, putting a maker space in downtown. Many communities I work with, I ask them, do you have space available in your downtown? And they say, oh, yes, we do. Well, come up with a maker space, because I don't know who said it, wherever the children go, parents will follow. And so this is very important to keep in mind. Digital equality, libraries, and other community institutions are very critical for you to have a digital inclusion plan and implemented. Offer digital literacy workshops in partnership with your libraries and others. Surely you can find tech-savvy volunteers, and then in the future you may be able to provide them with a stipend or something. Sustainability, rural, you have a lot of natural resources, amenities. There's a lot of wind farms. A small town here in Indiana has wind farms, and they are generating a lot of revenue, which they're going to turn around and use it for digital literacy, ramp up their computer labs, add Wi-Fi hotspots, map their Wi-Fi hotspots, and promote them among their community, especially the millennials. They will certainly appreciate that. And so with that, I'm gonna end my presentation, and I'm gonna open it up for a Q&A. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, Roberto, thank you very much. A lot of good advice here for especially small communities and rural communities in British Columbia. What I'd like to do is spend the next 20 minutes or so in terms of a number of areas that we're interested in the BC area, particularly learning from you about some of the communities that you've researched. You've been involved when you were in Mississippi with a number of small communities. Maybe just tell me a little bit about some of the small communities in Mississippi that you've worked with, and what were their greatest challenges?
Yes, sure. The greatest challenge I saw at the forefront was a lack of awareness. So no, they were not on the same page. There was a couple local champions, part-time mayors that were really interested, but they didn't. The rest of the community did not understand why this was important. So lack of awareness is a thing that is critical, but very interestingly is often overlooked. So that's one of the things that I realized. And I've worked with, again, with communities that are very, very small. They have part-time mayors. They have part-time economic developers. And so it's a challenge to get that awareness where everybody understands that this is an issue or an opportunity. It goes both ways, and then you can take it from there. So that's the number one thing I've seen in my field work, is that lack of awareness. Those that do have the awareness, of course, the next question they ask is, how much is this going to cost me? Right? I don't have the funds. I mean, I'm a part-time mayor. How do you expect me to come up with all this? So these baby steps that I've mentioned earlier, these typically don't cost a lot. It's just the understanding and your time and passion for your community really to pull this off. Once you pull these off, then you start to get some momentum, and then you can bring on board other members from the community to then start thinking about funding. And while money is important, if you don't have the will to do things, then money is really irrelevant if you don't have the will. Once you have the will, you will find ways to find the money. But the key advice is, do not focus on the money off the bat, because many of these baby steps really are not expensive at all. The third advice that I've seen in my field, or the third lesson learned that I've seen in my field work, is that once you get a certain momentum going and it clicks, you can tell when it clicks, when the community goes, I get it. And then they start thinking and acting digitally. It is amazing with this kind of things they come up with on their own. And that's when I start learning from them. So an example, this community in Mississippi, 14,000 people, they had a student worker in one of the in the Chamber of Commerce, and they wanted to map all their Wi-Fi hotspots that were available to the public. And so they got the student worker to map them, to go to every McDonald's, every library, whatever. It's a very small community, so it was feasible. And then they put that map on Google Maps and put it on their social media page that was just created for that purpose. Well, a population of 14,000 people, it got 1,200 likes in under an hour. And they started getting a lot of questions or comments of, I did not know we had all this access. So this fact of getting those things mapped was phenomenal to me. I would have not thought about that, and it earned them brownie points. So those are the three key advice, John, that I would give them.
I get it. Now, what would actually be the first activity that you would do in a small community or a rural community? Of those three, or any other activity? You talked about the students and so forth, but here am I, a small community. I haven't got a clue how to get started. What should be my first thing? Call you?
No, the first thing you've got to do is once they get it, you can put together a very small team of folks. And then first and foremost, you've got to map your assets. You've got to make sure you understand
your assets. Okay.
What you have and what you don't have. Yes, you've got to do that. Many small communities, once they map their assets and they realize how much is going on, they're surprised. They're like, okay, I didn't know this was taking place, or all this activity in different venues. And the reason for that is because typically these small communities with that industrial age mentality are typically looking outward, right? They're looking outward at what they don't have and what they would like to attract. And they many times fail to look inward.
So Roberto, in the consulting world, most consultants will say, okay, what we need to do is a SWOT analysis. We have to look at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Many small communities just don't do that. And I think your advice about looking at your assets to find out what you have in your community and the strengths that you have, but also identifying where the gaps are. How are people going to know how to identify the gaps if they just don't know what they don't know? So
right,
is there a way for them to do that?
That's where the intelligent community framework is really useful. When you look at those 6 indicators, you can use those to kind of look around and see and kind of see what you have and what you don't have. I typically focus on the what you do have, because obviously you will have stuff you don't have. But if you focus on the don't have, then it becomes frustration, and then it really can kill this movement right, immediately. So it's basically what you do have. So for example, there was this small community that had a library that had 2 computers that people were using, and then they connected with the bank, a local bank, family owned for decades, that they were about to go through a turnover on their equipment. And so they spoke, this local champion that understood using the framework was able to connect the dots, talk to the bank and said, why don't you donate these to the library? And then let's go to the high school and let's get a couple of tech-savvy volunteers to teach classes. So there you go, 3 previously unknown assets. They were there, they were just not looked at with this framework. Then we're connected, and now this community offers weekly digital literacy workshops.
Very good. Knowing your assets is very important. But as you say, learning about what your gaps might be can be done through the ICF program. At no cost, community can apply to become recognized as an intelligent community or a Smart 21 community, which will start again in September of this year. And as a result of that, they'll find out very quickly whether they made that cut or they didn't. And we have a thing called a report card, which then allows them to learn where they were deficient compared to their competition for that year. So there is a process that's not very expensive or time consuming. So there is a way for them to do that. That's very good. But let me go on to this question. You shared some information about crowdfunding, and I found it very interesting that 2,300 miles between the creator and the funder. These communities in British Columbia, would you advise them to leverage the technology to get access to resources across Canada?
Well, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it makes it very, I mean, you may be a small community, but you may have a unique boutique or certain artisan product or something. If you're not online, then you're just restricted to your immediate, vicinity. That physical restraint, I call it, is really no more in the online world. So definitely, again, but how do you take advantage of these? You first have to know that there is something going on. We're in the middle of a transition, and that it is not impossible to make that transition. And so once that awareness is there, then again, the community picks it up and goes with it. But definitely, there are multiple ways, multiple applications that can be done to leverage this. I really call it the railroad of the 21st century, or the 4-lane highway of the 1950s. Are you leveraging it? Are you really using it to benefit your community? And many communities, I'll be honest, many communities tell me, I don't want to grow. We don't want to grow. We just want to be here, keep our small town feel. And that's perfectly fine. But to do that, you've got to adapt. And adapt does not mean that you're aiming at growth. You may just want to develop. You may want to be able to offer, Google Class certificates to your local high school kids that 10 years ago would have been impossible just to think about that.
Right. So let's move on to another question. Once you've achieved all this connectivity, and by the way, you mentioned fast connectivity. How fast is fast connectivity?
Oh, that's a good question. It really depends who you ask. Since it's British Columbia and Canada, I can make fun of the FCC here in the U.S. It's just so the US here, the FCC defines broadband as 25 megs down and 3 megs up, which to me is a speed that was defined by looking through the rear view mirror, honestly. But hey, that's what it is, and that's what it is now. That's fine. I think that if you're going to go through the process of upgrading your infrastructure, make sure you plan to leave plenty of bandwidth to up that speed when needed, and it'll be sooner rather than later. So an exact speed of what entails broadband is really hard to answer, but I would argue that somewhere at, maybe even 25-25 synchronous is what I would call broadband today. Of course, next year when mixed reality hits, when telehealth becomes just everywhere, you're going to need faster speeds. But I understand that you've got to take it at incremental steps. So I hope that answered your question.
Sure, and in Canada, the CRTC has it at 50. But as you say, make it flexible so that you're able to add on as much as possible, and also recognize that latency is also a very important part of this to be included in your consideration. But once you have this connection, what do you think some of the uses and applications should be that are considered some of the best ideas to get a return on investment for some of these communities, especially small communities, like maybe look at tourism, or are there other kinds of things that you can recommend from your experiences?
Yeah, definitely. So virtual tours are very, very popular. So you do a virtual tour of your community and you post it on your YouTube channel. Or first and foremost, do you have an online presence, right? Do you have one? Is it adequate? Is it updated? Are you engaging with your residents digitally? That's the first baby step, low-hanging fruit. You know what? Our website has not been updated in 20 years or 10 years or whatever. Then you're like, okay, let's start there. Once you have that, then virtual tours are very, very common, where if you can go in and film around your community and highlight specific stuff that you would like to highlight and offer it as a virtual tour online, and then promote it through your social media and your website and whatever. Agritourism is a big thing in rural communities. If you can afford it, that's a little bit down the road, but augmented reality tours of your community and its natural assets, agritourism, I think that's coming, and that's very popular. You can also use your online presence to market, whatever tourism destinations you have, obviously. That's another low-hanging fruit. Telehealth, that's not necessarily in the control of the community, but if you have a clinic in your community, make sure that they do have the connectivity and the know-how to then telehealth and remote in with other larger hospitals. That is a big, huge brownie point for quality of life for your residents. Same goes for telework. If you can allow some sort of telework among your local employers or even the city or whatever, those are really the applications that you can start with. But again, look at your online presence first and foremost. If you can conduct some citizen engagement activities online so you can get some feedback. And hey, don't be afraid to ask your residents, how would they use it? I am sure they will have very creative ideas for that.
Some of these new applications, obviously the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and many of the other disruptive technologies we've discussed earlier, do you really see them as being involved in some of these small and rural communities?
Yes. Yes, on two fronts. One, everything is cognified. It'll benefit everybody that's using it, right? That has the technology. That includes rural communities in their applications, how they're shopping, what they're choosing to study. Once we have this implemented into schools, it'll be very kind of a one-on-one educational system that we've foregone for the past 120 years or so, I think, on that front. But it can also help if you can kind of organize some, instead of business plan competitions, you can do hackathons or other stuff, and rural residents may find a use for this artificial intelligence that can then open up for more investment. So for example, in a community here in Indiana, this young lady, I must have guessed she was a senior in high school, she must have had 17, whatever, stood up and said, I just developed a charger for my phone using the wind. So I put it on the top of my car and I drive and it charges the phone, because I just felt that, during ice storms and stuff, you don't have electricity. So this thing could help, whatever. And they're planning to selling it to third world countries, where everybody has a cell phone, but there's electricity is not as reliable. And so I asked her, how much did it cost you to do that prototype? She said $30. So imagine if you can take her and then couple it with your typical traditional business training and business plans and all that stuff. This lady in a community of 2,000 people in Indiana may be producing or outsourcing the manufacturing or whatever the case is. But lack of creativity is not the issue. The issue I've seen in rural communities, again, is how to apply that creativity with these applications. So I think that's very interesting indeed, what's coming in the near future.
So that's a quick, very interesting segue to the question of, how do you get kids and people in these communities really interested in sort of the digital jobs of the future as opposed to just falling back on the traditional jobs?
I think they already know. Of course, not everybody's going to be a programmer. You don't want that. But I think that you've got to listen to them, give them an environment that is very, very needed. The research shows it pretty clear. Entrepreneurship does not happen in a vacuum. Traditional entrepreneurship and the digital age entrepreneurship, it does not. So make sure you create an ecosystem that, come up with a makerspace if possible. Let them hang out with other kids that are more artistic in nature, with those that are more engineer inclined. When you get those two groups together, fascinating things happen. Co-working space, rent it out or give tours to the school for STEM concepts that are learning, but they cannot afford their makerspace. They can come and do it. Kids already have a feel for this, and they can be very creative. It's just the environment they're in is so industrial age focused. And so that's raises larger issues down the road, or more complex than what a rural community can do. But what a rural community can actually do is just starting with a microcosmos or microenvironment and just letting them kind of play with the technology, get them exposed to that, and supporting them in any way possible. And look, a makerspace is not, I am sure many rural communities in Canada, as they do here, they have a lot of vacant buildings available. It's a matter of, again, do you have the will to do this? Are we on the same page that this is an issue? And you can pull it off. Of course, you can then offer, Coursera and these MOOCs platforms that are out there, but let the kid thrive. That is really, I think they are attuned to what's coming. You just need to let them thrive, to either open them doors so they can then apply for these digital jobs, or they can start their own little idea.
Some of these communities may be very good neighbors to other communities. Let's say that these new ideas pop up in one community. How proactive should they be in sharing those solutions? Are there different models out there, licensing, fees, or just basically offering solutions to challenges for free to your neighbors?
I think on the licensing, commercializing part, I'm really not an expert. I don't get that far. But I can tell you that there was this community that instead of doing a business plan competition in the high school, they did an app development competition. They offered an iPad to whomever won. And the challenge was to address, some sort of local government issue. Teenagers typically hear their parents complain a lot, so they have a pretty good grasp of what's not working. And because of their digital mindset that they already have, they can come up with a solution. If that applies to neighboring communities, by all means, go ahead and do it. The more people use it, the more feedback you get, and the more robust the product or the service is. That's another low-hanging fruit example of what can be done. But again, are you supporting, encouraging these kids to pursue these kind of exercises or what ifs, mental exercises?
Right. So, some of these communities that we're talking about, they have to get the infrastructure done right first, right? So we have communities that may not have cellular or broadband at all. Some of these, maybe even remote communities, and we'll be talking to one of those communities later that had only a couple hundred people in their community, and then had to make a decision around, how does the community stay together and so forth. So we're seeing more interest from non-traditional carriers to deliver infrastructure to those areas, and these are just people who have some technical skills. It'd be interesting to hear about your experience on this front and where I understand there's been much more participation from local governments and from smaller ISPs providing infrastructure, as well as just very capable individuals who build meshes themselves and so forth. What's been your experience?
Yeah, the infrastructure obviously is a key thing, a crucial thing. But before I jump into answering your question directly, again, the underline of all this is that mindset change. And for the community to have a mindset change, you don't necessarily need to have fiber to the home. So as long as that mindset change does not occur, then we're behind from the get-go. But about the infrastructure part, that's interesting, because what I've seen, I think is going to be the solution, is co-ops in a way. I don't know if there's an equivalent over there in Canada, but I think electric co-ops are things that are really a very good, feasible mechanism to which to get broadband out there. Because in all reality, if a larger carrier has not wired you adequately in this 2018, odds are they won't. And the reason for that is because the ROI is simply not there. So it's going to have to fall on the community for sure. How to approach that is going to be up to the community. It's going to vary on political ideology, and it's going to vary on many, many things. But again, once the community has that mindset, they can be very creative. And of course, they can reach out to co-ops. They can do their own mesh network. They can do their own municipal broadband. There are many things that can be tried. But the question is, do you have the mindset necessary to really push this through?
Okay. Here's a question that just came in. We're talking about putting in this infrastructure. The costs are possibly thousands of dollars to do this, and the small community might not be able to afford it. Large providers may not be interested in putting in a connection if it's not cost effective. So maybe a grant can be provided. Maybe that helps in terms of an initial connection, but the question really focuses on who pays for the ongoing costs, and are there ideas around how that can happen?
Yeah, there's a couple models. Of course, access to credit is going to be critical. The community may have to pass a bond and use it to leverage the credit and then build it out that way. If the community decides to run it itself, then they're going to have to gain that skill and that knowledge of running an ISP. Or ISP service. Now, if it's a public-private model where the community tackles through bonds the capital cost of building or digging and moving it out there, but then if they have a local carrier there that would be willing to then lease that infrastructure and then they run it, and you can reach an agreement with that particular carrier to who's going to maintain it and what are going to be the stipulations and blah, blah, blah. But really, if ISPs typically don't go because there's not enough density and it's really expensive to build it out. But if you can take that expensive build out and the community itself absorb that through bonds and credits and other stuff, it can be done. There are communities that did this in the early 2000s. By now, they've paid their bonds. And now it's a steady source of revenue for the county that otherwise it would be, their tax base is decreasing. So this is a utility that people will need and are needing now to go ahead and get things done. So there are several models there. But the key thing is that it's gonna be on the local community to take the lead on that.
Yeah. So sometimes this issue of critical mass is really important. Having enough people there to be able to do something. But this issue of critical mass, which is people, industry, clusters, connectivity, and so forth, in a rural setting, how do you get people engaged to be coming together to make those kinds of decisions? I mean, the Canadian Smart Cities Challenge actually asks these communities to rally together and come up with big ideas and so forth. But at the small community level, even just coming up with this idea that we need connectivity to be relevant and to survive, how do you think communities can rally together and make this happen? What's your thinking around that?
Well, like anything regarding public policy is how you frame the issue. And what I've seen communities rally behind and get things done is the homework gap. right? Your kids are being left out. They're missing out on many opportunities, and they're at a disadvantage. So the homework gap is a huge thing that can be framed that way. It's not that you're being opportunistic. It's just that it's an issue, and you can focus if you need a conversation to get the community, behind it. The homework gap is, I think, one of the most effective talking points that you can do. Once you get that rallying point, so it's again public policy 101. We've got to agree on the problem. If we don't agree on the problem, we're not gonna even, discuss meaningful solutions. So if you can agree on the problem, that's how you can get people to rally around. And there will be ways. It's not going to be easy, but there are ways to leverage multiple grants or bonds or credits or something to get it done. But it all boils down to that. Do we agree that this is a problem? And if we do, because if you just frame it as connectivity in general, people may go, yeah, we need it, kind of, but why? So that's where the awareness comes in. But when you frame it and say, okay, look, listen, our kids are being left behind, period. The homework gap, and you can go around that topic, but find an issue that will resonate across ideologies, across age groups, and typically children is that point.
So, Roberto, we're coming up to the end of our rural masterclass conversation here. But I just want to thank you. And I do have one last question, actually two. One is if any of the communities that are listening in at this point, since we have so many other questions coming in, if we're not able to continue this conversation very much longer, would they be able to contact you through me? And would you be willing to respond to them?
Well, yes, of course.
Okay, good. That's the first question. The second one is, you're doing a lot of research, and particularly using data and some of your charts and so forth are very interesting. Are there any bits of research that you're conducting now at Purdue University that communities in British Columbia would potentially benefit from? And these are actually your last thoughts, so this is your last question.
Yeah, sure. I'm very interested. We're just deploying a series of workshops for entrepreneurs and small business owners to expand their online presence. We're excited about that one. But I also have a grant in Nebraska with 3 rural communities, very small communities, and we're going to teach them how to leverage digital platforms to increase civic engagement. The ultimate objective is to make the community more responsive. Most of the research is focusing on urban areas and how they can be more responsive and open data and all these things. But I think rural has a lot to gain from it as well, especially because if I'm guessing it's the same situation in Canada. When you have a city town hall or a town hall period, you typically have a certain demographics that show up to those meetings, right? But you're missing out on the younger families, you're missing out on the young folks. So the digital platforms can expand that feedback. And when expanding that feedback and responding accordingly, your community is now becoming more responsive. So I'm very excited about that. We're updating the Digital Divide Index that we did here in the US. That one, jumpstarts important conversations, but I will keep you in the loop of whatever research comes out. There's another last thing, an article that was just accepted for publication. I'll send you, Robert and John, the link that found Telework impacts positively median household income at the local level, and it has neighboring spillovers as well. So that's another key thing to approach your policymakers and community leaders about.
Well, thank you very much, Roberto, and we all appreciate the time and the generous information that you've shared with everybody here in British Columbia. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the organizers, the BC government, ICF Canada. Thank you very much.
Well, it has been my pleasure. And just so you know, I am actually not only talking the talk, but walking the walk, because I'm here in my vehicle parked, giving a webinar on the other side of the continent. So that's pretty cool. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, sir. Bye.
Bye now. Thank you. And everybody listening, since the webinar is quite long, we are offering a 2 to 3 minute bio break, but that doesn't mean you need to leave. If you're okay and you want to continue on, I'm going to now invite back Susan Stanford, and we're going to have a little chat following this rural webinar. Susan, are you there?
Hi, John. I'm back.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Professor Roberto, yes, Professor Roberto is one of our key people at ICF who participated with us for many, many years. He ran an institute for us in Mississippi, and now he's at Purdue University. So he's been, a really good colleague, and we appreciated his time. What did you think about some of the things he had to say?
So I thoroughly enjoyed it, John. There were a couple things that really stood out to me. Really liked the idea and the conversation around how much speed do people need, and the fact that we are looking at a sliding scale. We're seeing globally different jurisdictions, countries, and areas are setting minimum thresholds. And I think from a provincial point of view, while we certainly applaud the CRTC for setting a new national minimum threshold for Canada, that we also need to take into account how communities really want to grow and making sure that they are future-proofing and making sure that they can dial up the speed as it's required. So it's kind of just-in-time speed for how they want to access the internet. And that could be for any number of things.
So ICF Canada, about a year and a half ago, undertook to write a paper called Broadband, the Next Essential Utility. So if anybody is interested in that paper, we can pass it on to them. It speaks about speed, but it also speaks about other elements related to broadband. What I'm interested in over the next minute or two is just to understand from you what other programs you have in your department that talks about these kinds of issues. I understand you have a handbook on connectivity that people can access.
Yes, we released the first generation of the handbook last fall. And this is a great guide that I think in the first iteration, we handed out at the UBCM conference in Vancouver and blasted through a couple boxes to communities that gives them a checklist to go through of how to actually assess, very similar to what Roberto was talking about, assess their assets from a digital infrastructure point of view, what steps they can take, how to engage service providers, and how to actually begin to integrate broadband connectivity into their overall community plan.
Can they get it over the internet?
Yes, they can. It's available on the Northern Development Initiative Trust website, and just look for the Connecting BC program. And there we have a couple videos, as well as the handbook is available in PDF form.
And what other things are you doing at your department?
In our department, we have a multifaceted program that looks primarily at digital infrastructure for the province. So we work with service providers, both large and small, to look at where infrastructure gaps exist within the network, to ensure that communities and households can increase their access to the internet. But we also work in cooperation with other ministries within the province. So for instance, the Ministry of Education, as they've begun to build out increased connectivity to K-12 schools throughout the province. And I was quite struck by when Roberto was talking about the homework issue, and we've actually been receiving that type of feedback where kids now have greater connectivity within their school, but don't actually have the same level of connectivity to engage in their homework and other types of studies when they go home. We also work with our Ministry of Jobs, Trade and Technology, and the types of programs that they bring together to bring technology applications, technology companies to try and solve solutions at the community level. So they're also very deeply engaged in bringing those programs to make sure that we can realize the benefits from a digital infrastructure investment.
Great. It sounds like a great department and a lot of great opportunities for some of these communities to work with you. We're going to move on now, and I'm going to introduce Robert Bell, and he's going to take over the rest of the webinar. So Susan, we'll be back with you later on at the conclusion.
Thanks, John.
Okay, bye for now. So Robert Bell is going to take over moderating the next part of this webinar. I'm going to introduce Robert. He's the executive director and co-founder of the Intelligent Community Forum, headquartered in New York City. Robert's also the chief researcher and author of several books, papers, and reports on the intelligent community. He's also organized many of the ICF summits, this year taking place in London, England from June 4th to the 6th, and we hope some of you might consider participating with us. He's also worked on many community accelerators and is an expert in satellite communications, broadband, and many other things. He's worked on evaluating Smart 21 and intelligent communities. And along with Robert will be a panel of community members from across BC and from Alberta, namely Mitch Thompson from Olds, Alberta at the Olds Institute, Andrea Wilkie, who's the Executive Director, Community Futures, Central Kootenay and Nelson, BC, Emily de Rosenthal, CEO of South Island Prosperity in the Greater Victoria, BC area, and Brenda Anderson, CFO of the Village of Grand Island, British Columbia. So thanks everybody for participating, and I'd like to now pass the mic over to Robert.
Well, thank you, John. I have to say we're all privileged to have heard from my colleague Roberto Gallardo. He's well, he's just kind of he's one in a million, I find. I'll be right with you one second. And okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. So I'm going to be the moderator of this section, as John pointed out, and I appreciate very much the chance to speak with you today. Roberto certainly had a lot of, I think, very thought-provoking things to share with you, and I'm going to pick up that theme that he was sharing just a little bit, talking about this digital economy that we're part of, and he gave you some startling statistics about it. And I was very particularly struck by that thing about we're carrying a supercomputer in our pocket, and yet somehow we don't realize its profound impacts. Well, this guy certainly does, because he makes his living in this economy. He wears black, he doesn't shave very often, and he spends his time looking at computer screens. And so he's doing pretty well from the digital economy, but the plain fact is not everybody is. The digital economy actually has some other significant impact. The statistic I was talking about is right here. In the digital economy, we've seen something really remarkable happen. From 2005 to 2014 in North America, some 65 to 70% of households were in segments that on average saw their household income either flat or decline. And you just compare that to 1993, 2005, when it was 2% of households. So something profound is happening to us, and it's not entirely clear what it is, at least not to most of us. But maybe here's some of the answer. In 1990, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, the big three American automakers, had about $65 billion in sales, thinking about 2015 dollars, and those are American dollars, and they had about 1 million employees. In 2015, the three biggest tech companies, Apple, Facebook, and Google, had $1 trillion in sales and only 137,000 employees. And that tells you a great deal about the way the world is going. What we're basically dealing with, unfortunately, is a tale of two economies. In one of those economies, people are doing well, they're finding opportunity, they're seeing their standards of living rise, they're doing important work. And in the other economy, well, they're not finding very much of that at all. The economy we're living in is one increasingly where you have a division between the people whose jobs can be automated, from assembly line workers and mail carriers to printers and auto mechanics, and the economy of people who are doing the automating. And you know, this is the real situation is not quite as grim as this. Some very good studies recently by McKinsey looked at this into the future and said, well, 60% of jobs have some component of them that's routine, that can be automated, but only a very small percentage of jobs are actually going to be eliminated by this. Nonetheless, the impacts are profound. I think one number, Roberto Gallardo shared a lot of interesting numbers with you. I'm going to give you one. In 1992, every day about 100 gigabytes of data moved across the world's networks, and that's a lot, but you may very well have a computer that has got that much storage plus. I'm talking to you from a computer that's got about a terabyte of storage, and it's not very expensive. Well, in 2014, every day, 1.4 billion gigabytes of data moved across the world's network. That's kind of astounding, and it's obviously having impact. So one of the impacts it's having is making the data about stuff as valuable as the stuff itself. And in this graph, you see that red line showing one of Roberto's exponential curves. The data flow is actually exceeding the physical flow of goods and services. And it's also having an interesting effect you've probably seen in your headlines. It's creating these giant companies from out of nowhere that are really weird. For instance, the world's largest taxi company is Uber, and it owns no vehicles. And the world's most popular media company, hands down, is Facebook, and it creates no content. The world's most valuable retailer on earth is in China, Alibaba, and it has no inventory. And the world's largest hotel company is Airbnb. Guess what? Owns no real estate. So what are you and your community going to do about this global economy of which, like it or not, you are a part, and to which, as Roberto so, I think, passionately said, you have to adapt. Even if you don't want to change what's good about your community, you still have to adapt to what's going on. Well, the first thing you can do about it is the good old advice from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy: don't panic. Don't assume that you know how it's going to play out, because this stuff is amazing, it's scary, it's exciting, but it's not going to go just the way the forecasters tell you. And if you need evidence of that, let's look at the lowly automated teller machine, the cash machine, which you go to probably once a week or more to get some cash. They were deployed widely in North America in the late 90s and early 2000s, and you would expect as a result that bank tellers would just basically be extinct. But they are not. In fact, since 2000, the number of full-time bank tellers has grown 2% per year. And why? Well, because ATMs let banks operate their branches much more cheaply, and that has led them to open many, many more branches. So every time we make something new, it threatens what we have, but it also creates new opportunities. It just takes time to see what they're going to be. We live in this age of disruption. You don't have to wait for it, it's coming for you. And this is really what the foundation of the Intelligent Community Forum. We believe there's a set of things called intelligent communities that can use today's digital tools, the same tools that are causing such disruption to our lives and our economy and how we interact with each other, and build inclusive prosperity for the many, to solve social problems, sometimes very old ones and sometimes ones that are being created by this same digital revolution, and also to enrich the culture that makes the place called home so special. So in the next few minutes, before we get to some of our other panelists, I'm going to talk about how communities do that. Starting 15 years ago, we evolved through observation a methodology, and Roberto introduced you to it. We think there's 6 key things that communities today have to do in order to survive, in order to prosper. One is broadband. We've talked about it. We'll talk about it some more. The next one is the ability to create a knowledge workforce, a workforce made of people who are not just going to use their hands to make a living, but are going to use their heads. We think that those people need to be engaged in innovation because, as a former winner of the Nobel Prize in economics noted, 80% of all economic growth comes from innovation. And that means that if you're not part of that innovative economy, you're missing out on all but 20% of the growth in the economy. It requires advocacy, and I'm going to talk about that in detail in just a moment and tell you what that is. It requires digital equality because you can live in a place and have it be very successful, but you can also at that same time be leaving a lot of your citizens out, and you don't want to do that. And finally, sustainability, not just as a global topic, but as a means to improve and preserve the quality of life of the place called home. What we've seen over and over again around the world, large communities, small communities, is that when they pursue all of these things, they generate a growth cycle. They often go from stagnation to success. They're able to turn around a community's future that looked as though it was going the wrong way and find a new purpose, a new way of living in this global economy because they have adapted to its requirements. So let's talk about how that gets done. The first thing I want to talk about is actually not first on that list. It's about advocacy, and I think it echoes what you just heard from Professor Gallardo. You have to start with the people. You have to start with changing minds, changing how people think. So advocacy is our word for the glue that binds together everything else you do. It means turning your citizens, your businesses, and your institutions into advocates for the changes that need to be made. It means creating champions for development along the lines of the intelligent community, and doing that across the spectrum of income and education levels, ethnic and cultural divides, political ideologies. And it's not easy, but boy, is it essential. And it's essential for one very important reason: that people hate change. Mark Twain said it for all time: I'm all for progress. It's change I can't stand. And if you get it wrong, when you try to create change in your community, you either get it right through advocacy or you wind up with this. It is so easy for citizens, businesses, and institutions to become the biggest obstacle to change. And once that happens, it's very hard to turn it around. So how does it work? How does it work? It begins with determination by local government to engage the community in dialogue about the future. And that really is very much a two-way street engagement. It means connecting with your citizens, your businesses, your institutions. It means finding the people who already get it and making sure that they're your champions. It means physical meetings. It means digital interaction to get those young people who may not attend your regular meetings. It means finding recognized leaders of the community and letting them become the voice for what needs to be done. And when that kind of collaboration gets going and becomes effective, Roberto talked about how you see the moment when it begins to happen, then you get this. Then you get this opportunity for all the other things you want to do to be driven by that citizen engagement, that business engagement, that institutional engagement that provides the energy and the commitment to get things done. And when you do this right, in addition to that enrichment of your local community culture, you also get more energetic economic development. You get better investment attraction. You get better business generation, because the community has a unique vision of what it can do and where it fits in this new global economy. So that, in a broad brush, and I'm going to have to go pretty fast because I want to make good use of your time, is what advocacy is about. It's a system that gets started with a conversation over coffee and can go practically anywhere from there. So let's talk about the next piece of this, in particular about the foundations of the growth economy. And again, I think Roberto said something very powerful. You may not want to grow your community in terms of population. You may not want it to change. That's fine, but you also don't want it to shrink. And this kind of adaptation is powerful for preserving what you have, as well as for changing and perhaps creating more opportunity. Peter Drucker, the management consultant, came up with this term, the knowledge work or the knowledge workforce, because he observed back in the 70s that within 30 years, it would be impossible to live in the middle class if you only knew how to work with your hands. And that was pretty good prophecy, because we're seeing it around us all the time. So intelligent communities work to create a skilled workforce that can use the knowledge that they have to add value to everything they do. And we're not talking about, just by the way, the usual prospects, the scientists, the managers, the lawyers, the computer programmers. We're talking in a knowledge economy about everybody: the construction worker, the retail clerk, the assembly line worker. Frankly, the only way to keep the robots from someday taking your job away is to make sure that you add more value than the cost of keeping you employed. If you think that sounds harsh, boy, do I agree with you, but I also believe it's the truth. So how do you build this knowledge-based economy, this knowledge-based workforce? You do it by turning the educational institutions that you already have into ladders of opportunity. And you're using what you have. You have elementary schools, you have a secondary school, perhaps. You may have a community college or a technical school. If you're fortunate, you have or are not too far away from a university. And the key is connection. In intelligent communities, you see universities interconnect with those two-year colleges or those technology schools to share research programs, to share career courses, which many universities don't have, to provide the community college or the technical school students with the opportunity to earn a 4-year degree in addition to what they're doing. They interconnect with secondary schools to provide students with advanced learning opportunities. And the secondary kids go down to elementary school to get those kids excited. So you take what you have and connect it so as to create more energy. And employers are at the table. This is something that is so often left out in our educational philosophy, and it's just, we think, vital in the 21st century. Those employers can bring real world content. They can bring business mentors, work study programs, internships. You can take what often happens, which is that dad or mom comes into their kid's class to talk about something, and institutionalize it, because it makes the students aware of local career opportunities that don't necessarily require them to go away someplace else and never come back, but instead perhaps to go, become educated, and bring that education back to the community to help it advance. And in this same mixture, government and the community play an essential role, right? Because local and provincial governments already have a role in education, a huge one. But for all levels of education, what government and the community can do is to convene, is to bring these groups together and make that collaboration possible, as well as the individuals and civics groups doing what they've always done for local education, which is to give of themselves to make it better for the sake of the next generation. So that's, again, a systems view of how communities work on this issue of creating the knowledge workforce. And it can be done in a city of 20 million. It can be done in a city of a couple thousand people. And we're going to actually get an example of exactly that. We're going to look at a community in Alberta that, among other accomplishments, has rethought its educational system on a digital foundation. So I'd like you to welcome Mitch Thompson, who's the Executive Director of the Olds Institute for Community and Regional Development in Olds, Alberta, which this year became one of the Smart 21 Communities of the Year. So congratulations to you, Mitch.
Thank you very much, Robert, and hello, everyone. Just going to turn on my slide deck here, and the community of Olds is a small rural community of about 9,200 people. We're just 45 minutes north of Calgary in central Alberta. We're an agricultural community with traditional industries, oil and gas, agriculture, the type of small community that you might see on a map among many others and not recognize the difference. The community has changed, though, and has become known for broadband. Every community has citizens, people who think about the things they'd like to do if they only had the time, the resources, the money, and so it goes. The beauty is, in Olds, a group of people got together and formed the Olds Institute to empower the community, to encourage people to use their time, talent, and treasury to truly make a difference as they'd like to see it. The Olds Institute was formed by the town, the college, the Ag Society, and the Chamber of Commerce to do just that. They started engaging citizens in the community and talking to them about what their goals were, what it was they wanted to do to truly make a difference in the community. And at that time, going back to 2005, citizens felt they needed to do more in the economic development space. They chose to create a network in the community to differentiate Olds so Olds could become the small to medium enterprise capital in the province. They created the Olds Connected Community Network, Canada's first 100% owned community fiber broadband network. And today we have internet capability that is used like a utility. We have broadband to every home and business in the community. And we created this network so ISPs could come and use it and pay an access fee to the community like other utilities. We recognize that infrastructure enables economic opportunity, and creating a network was the first step. When the big industries were not willing to run out and join us in our journey, we created our own ISP. And today, ONET provides symmetrical bandwidth to our residents at a gigabit speed. We provide internet, television, and telephone services. We took this model a little bit further when we added Mountain View Power, and we now provide electricity, natural gas, and green energy. The revenues from both of these businesses help support community economic development in Olds, and they truly enable us to do what we do. The dollars that we get from these initiatives allowed us to also expand our network from a terrestrial network to a mobile network. And we now have free Wi-Fi in our parks, community spaces, business districts, educational facilities, and hospital. Students who do not live in the community go to many of our community spaces to do homework after school. And our goal was to create a community that was intelligent, creative, and entrepreneurial. The intelligence is knowing that broadband is not the industry, it is the enabler of industries. It is encouraging people to use information in a creative and entrepreneurial ways. Now, initially, we thought when we announced that we had gigabit internet at the same time as Google, we could also take on Amazon, and we'd create an e-commerce portal that business would just flock to. And the truth is, while we gave this tool to business, we hadn't done the work to create a knowledge workforce for them to really take advantage of e-commerce. And that's where Olds College comes in. One of our biggest partners right from the beginning has been Olds College, a partner in our organization. And by working with the institution to try and inform and educate the community has truly been a big benefit, both for the college and for ourselves. Olds College now has more bandwidth per student than any other college in the nation. 2.5 devices are used per student at all times on campus on average. And it's changed the way that they can do things. When you wander into a classroom at Olds College, you no longer find books. When you go into libraries, you find people using iPads. You find them using virtual reality types of tools. You find them exploring opportunities in ways that are different than has normally been done. Having broadband connectivity on campus truly made a difference. And what it has done is it has enabled the students on campus to go from, being in a classroom to being in the community. Going mobile or having the broadband connectivity that supports mobile learning through providing that fiber link to a Wi-Fi system has enabled our students to start learning differently. Olds College has taken many of their programs and gamified them. Things like heavy-duty mechanics are now tracking equipment repairs on iPads and using data to understand when things need to be repaired. In the agricultural space, from fertility to food, they're tracking where and what an animal eats and how it is processed and cared for right through to your plate at the restaurant. In the land and water resources area, whether you're looking at GIS or mechanical systems or just trying to figure out what's happening in our natural environment with bugs, data can be a big player. Olds College has taken things like their animal health sciences program to understand how animals walk, how their health is impacted by different foods, and what types of treatments can be provided to animals based on good data. And that's truly changing the way that our students work. So in this instance, it's a person learning about the movement of a horse so that they can work on a program that you might have seen called Cavalia, where equine enthusiasts will go to enjoy opportunities to witness horses in action. Olds College became an Apple Distinguished School because of the mobile learning methodology that they put into place. They changed their pedagogy from in-the-box thinking to here's a problem, use the tools in front of you to find solutions. And that's truly what made the difference for that organization in creating great students. Not only have they used technology in the classroom, but they have gigabit internet to the bed. So students at the college can use the same tools in the classroom, anywhere on campus, in the community, or right in their dormitories. Again, the idea of creating a knowledge workforce is creating a workforce that's ready to take on opportunity. Olds College received $16 million here a year ago to create the Workland Agricultural Institute and has a goal to find solutions on how to best feed 9 billion people in the world. They're using smart agricultural technologies to teach and inform on best practices around land management, food production, and all of the different uniquenesses that come from having good data and great practice in an educational facility. Now, creating a knowledge workforce, while we'd like to think that our academic institutions do it all alone, really starts when your kids are young. Here you see children using a smart board in a local daycare. And the goal is to start students thinking about sciences, technology, engineering, and math at a very young age. In the primary and middle and high school years, of course, students that have access to technology have access to information and likely do better than other schools in other areas. Olds is the only community in rural Alberta to have a top 20 ranking by high school graduation completion rates year after year. But it doesn't just start with kids and finish with youth. Including your seniors and all your residents in opportunities for digital inclusion makes a huge difference. Digital literacy matters for quality of life and, again, in support of all industries. Whether you're talking about education or health, it does make a significant difference. Our Wi-Fi network that's free across the community is located also in our hospital. And we've noted that our physicians are using these iPads now much like they used to use telehealth from hospital to hospital. And at the end of the day, most communities, most rural places have had this message for many years that you needed to go somewhere else to find opportunity. In Olds, we're trying to change that narrative by creating tools that create opportunity to support the growth and prosperity that we want in our community, to allow us to be competitive as a smart community today and long into the future. And it truly is about knowledge. Olds College was a blue-collar college, very hands-on. With new tools, they have the capacity and capability to really change the way education happens. A University of Alberta instructor was with us here recently, and he said, "There's something really unique here. It is not in the fiber, it is in the culture." And I truly believe that's correct.
And thank you very much. Congratulations. I think we can all see why Olds became a Smart 21 community this year. I have a couple questions for you, if I might.
Absolutely.
The first one I want to go back to is go back to the broadband network, which is where our discussion, I think, got started with Roberto. So you've done something amazing, which is to have this gigabit network in a relatively small place. What was your secret? How did that get just pulled off? How is that capitalized? Because I'm sure people who don't know would very much like to know.
Sure. So in our instance, it really was community engagement. It was recognizing that we didn't have the internet services that larger cities did. We didn't have the opportunities, and that people were moving away. It was having a community leadership that was willing to engage and empower residents. Again, our network was championed by a pharmacist, an implement dealer, and a couple of politicians who really saw the opportunity. And it was the municipality that gave us access to capital. They helped us create both the knowledge and then enabled us to get financing to build a community-owned network.
Very, very interesting. Again, it's worth saying over and over again. It starts with the people. It starts with how people feel about their community and about what they can do with it. I also noticed you mentioned I believe you mentioned water and electric utilities. Is Olds one of those communities that has its own municipally owned utilities?
No, but well, pardon me. Yes, we have. Of course, water, wastewater is part of a partnership type of a situation. But we saw internet or broadband internet as a utility itself, and so we've treated it like that from the onset. So it is an open network. Our ISP operates on it and actually pays to use the network, and that's what supports community development.
Sure. Well, this is one of those things, and again, we'll leave broadband in just a second, but it's one of those things that I wanted to say earlier. A really great way for communities to think about their broadband issue, if they feel that they're not being properly served, is to think about it in terms of risk reduction. How can you reduce the risk for private sector partners to come in and help you? And so, you did that by creating an open access network, getting it capitalized, and with the expectation that the income from the companies leasing it was going to cover your costs and provide a profit. So that's definitely a way to think about it. It's risk reduction and it's incrementalism. You start with something you can accomplish and get some cash flow, and then you can build from there. I want to also just turn around to something that really struck me from your presentation about the school, the college there. I visited a lot. I get to visit a lot of schools and universities, which is a great pleasure of mine. And one of the it's reminded me of an example I saw of a school of journalism where they were basically training their young people in the new tools of journalism, in conducting a video interview with your phone and blogging and on and on. And it really struck me as I was listening to you that the technology implementation at the college seems kind of gee whiz, and isn't it terrific? But what you're really doing is training the students there in the tools they're going to need. They're going to need to be competitive in agriculture, in equipment repair, whatever it might be. And I just think that's very impressive. I mean, is that how it's perceived there?
I do believe so. It's all about applied skills, and it's not just the skills that we need for today. It is about the skills we need for the future. So there's no question they've been very focused on that.
And you made a transition in your presentation from you decided to build your own e-commerce platform, only to discover, of course, that the community wasn't ready for it. But of course, there's also these other companies out there that are pretty good at it, like Amazon. So have you begun to see that change in your employer base, in your employer base, that they're beginning to demand more and more of the kinds of skills that the students at Olds College are being trained in?
Yes, absolutely. So we did step away from the e-commerce side in that earlier stage and bring it back. And what we've found is that whenever you open the conversation and you create an opportunity, it gets people thinking. So some of the tools we've failed on, but we've accepted that and we've encouraged that. And Olds College has been really good at stepping up to challenges and opportunities. And our business owners seem to be more apt to take risks because their municipality takes risks. And it's creating that culture where, you're not going to do it perfect, but it's better to move than to stand still.
I think you just said something of profound importance. Risk aversion is, governments are risk averse. They should be. They're the only people allowed to take your money away without a gun.
Yep.
And so, that's perfectly proper. And yet governments need to adapt and begin to take some risks and be willing to say, hey, that didn't work, but it didn't cost very much, and we feel we've learned a lot from it, because it creates the culture of innovation for the entire community.
Ultimately, Robert, this municipality empowered a nonprofit with tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands and then millions of dollars to create a network and some of these changes, and so it was incremental steps, but it was their courage that enabled it. Absolutely.
Incremental courage is a great motto, I think, to have for this movement. Be courageous, be bold, but take it step by step.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, listen, Mitchell, thank you very much. We're going to move on, but I really appreciate your presentation and look forward to hearing those of your colleagues.
Thank you.
All right. So next, innovation. What you already heard there was pretty innovative, and I think it's a good it's a good introduction to what we're going to be talking about. This is a word that you hear a lot about. It's very, very hard to get your arms around it, really. But it's simple enough. Innovation means creating something new. It means finding a new source of supply for what you're already doing, or developing a completely new market. And as I noted earlier, it really is the foundation of that exponential growth we're seeing. Now, not every new thing or source of supply or new market is worth calling an innovation, right? It has to be a problem. It has to be something that solves a problem or meets a need better than what's out there today. And so Mitch and his, talked about, he was, brave enough to tell us that they tried this thing in e-commerce and it didn't work. Well, okay, that was an innovation. It didn't solve as it turned out, it did not solve the problem the community has. So fine, let's accept what we learned from that and move on. But in the best situations, innovation does well enough to create income for a business, to create jobs for employees and wealth for the innovator. And intelligent communities promote innovation in two different spheres. And this is a pretty complex game. And it's going to look to you as though something that can only be done in a very large city, but I can tell you from my own experience that is absolutely not the case. In the private sector, they really work to create an innovation ecosystem, an ecosystem that tends to drive continuous positive change that affects everybody in the community. So it tends to draw, as you saw in Mitch's example, from education, whether it's a community college, a technical school, a university, sometimes even just the community. You've got a bunch of people in the community who are excited about a particular thing and bind together to make it happen. And the key is that it's not just a set of random actions, but it tends to have a structural approach. So those colleges, universities, communities will tend to do things like create hackathons, create competitions to build the next app that's going to serve something for the community, let's say. They will set up maker spaces. They'll get the loan or grants of some 3D printers and other high-tech equipment, put it into a vacant building, and invite the community to come in and learn and experiment. And they're really amazing places if you haven't been to one, because you just got to, everything from a bunch of hobbyists to folks who are actually trying to start a business. They've got an idea for a new product that they're going to prototype in there and see if it actually works. And then things become more organized. You get to the incubator model, which is typically a public-private thing, where an entrepreneur with an idea can turn it into a product and maybe get a customer. That's really what you're trying to do in an incubator. Find out whether this thing has legs. And there is not everybody succeeds. And that's, again, this tolerance of failure is important. Not everybody succeeds. Actually, you get a lot of ideas that don't work out. You get a lot of people who find out that they don't really want to live the life of an entrepreneur, but they still have a passion for what they do. And then for every company that comes out of that incubator with an idea, with a product, with maybe a customer, they then they want to ramp up. And so they will often go into an accelerator program where they have access to a lot of expertise, as well as services, accounting, and all those things that help them advance their idea from one customer to multiple customers. It sets them up basically to be able to scale the business and grow significantly. And so what we're talking about, of course, here is startups, is new companies. These are the foundation of economic growth in our century. And while very large companies, the brand names are terrific, they actually employ an amazingly small percentage of our population. Most of our population works for small business. And the extent to which those small businesses can grow faster is going to be good for all of us. So some of those startups, a very select few of those startups, manage to attract outside capital to invest in their ideas and to take it and ramp it up and begin to actually produce a lot of income and a lot of jobs. And this is the tiny minority that you really would like to have one or two of in your community, because they can make a radical difference. These are the gazelles, as named by David Birch from MIT, that grow so fast and create so many jobs that they radically transform the place called home, as well as expanding beyond it. You're not going to have very many of them, but it doesn't take very many of them. And those startups are there because they want to do that happy thing called an exit. They want to actually sell some or all of their company or recapitalize it in some way, and so that the owners can walk away and say, wow, we did really, really well. And that can happen on the grand scale that we read about in Silicon Valley. It can also happen just when a successful business owner retires and says, I'm going to sell the business on, and now I'm sitting on some money, and I've got a comfortable life. And by the way, I think I want to do something with it. And this is where the ecosystem shifts from a lot of hard work to push innovation up that hill to something that's self-sustaining, because now you have an entrepreneurial class that's beginning to reinvest in the community, and they're investing in those hackathons and maker spaces and incubators and accelerators. They're talent scouting. And again, you see this over and over again. It is easier to do in a big city, but it's entirely possible in a small city to do this kind of work. And so this is the model, if you will, you're aiming for when you're even starting out just from scratch. This kind of model is a great one to keep in mind, because it's how success happens in the private sector, and it can happen on all kinds of different levels, a different scale. But over and over again, it's the thing that drives positive change for the economy. Over on the public sector side, when government wants to innovate, and Mitch just gave us a great reason why this is so important. I've really heard it expressed so well, to say that it is the courage of the government, the courage of the community, that ultimately inspires the risk takers to do what they need to do, the private sector risk takers. But it's a slightly different model, of course, because we're in the halls of government. So it begins with government, and government wants to accomplish things. It wants to change. It wants to create better services, better products. But intelligent communities are smart enough to know that they're not going to just do that inside the four walls of the government office. Instead, they're going to make sure that they've got strong connections with the private sector entrepreneurs and innovators in the community, with citizens, businesses, and nonprofits, because that's where the needs are going to be identified. And they work very, very closely with them to ultimately come up with, what's our plan? How do we want to change? Do we want to engage in smart lighting? Do we want to work on GIS? What is it we want to do to solve our cities or our counties or our villages' most important problems? They turn that into, turn the results of their strategizing over to the government technology staff, which comes up, does what they're supposed to do. They come up with all the projects. And so far, things are looking pretty good, but intelligent communities add there's something very special to this, which is that there's absolutely no reason so often not to think about spending some money with your own community on innovation. There's probably talent in your community, and that's where you should look first, that can help you bring these projects about. And oh, by the way, of course, in a very close feedback loop with ultimately the people that you're trying to serve, the citizens, the businesses, and the nonprofits of your community. And so again, this is something, this is familiar in one way. We all have been through projects where we create and try to innovate on behalf of our community. But intelligent communities take a very system-wide approach to it, as you see here, to make sure that as many players in the community are engaged, because when you do that, you get much, much better results. It takes longer, it's a little harder, but you get tremendous improvement in what follows. So rather than my just claiming that, let's actually talk to some people who have been there making it happen. And the first of these is Andrea Wilkie, who's the Executive Director of Community Futures in Central Kootenay, who's going to talk about the city of Nelson, British Columbia, which was also, not this year, but last year, a Smart 21 Community of the Year. Andrea, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Robert. So thanks for the opportunity to share on behalf of our community the efforts we've been taking over the last few years to become an intelligent community. So as Robert mentioned, I'm the Executive Director with Community Futures, and we're an economic development nonprofit, and we also have programs for small businesses. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Nelson and Area Economic Development Partnership. It's a partnership between local government, Community Futures, and our local Chamber of Commerce. And the strategic priorities for the group are set by a committee of business owners. So back in 2013, the city of Nelson actually operates its own hydro utility. And they were digging up the roads and thought, hey, if we have to dig up our roads anyways, let's lay broadband through our downtown core. So that took place in 2013. And then the question came to the economic development group, how do we use this infrastructure to drive our local economic development? So, we've got this new infrastructure in place. What can we do with it to diversify our local economy? So we thought about, okay, how do we come up with our next steps for this? We thought about having a visioning session, bring together a group of people. And in the meantime, excuse me, we came across the Intelligent Community Framework, which I was going to walk you through, but Robert's already done a great job of doing that. And the one you see on your screen is actually, I think it's from 2013. So the sustainability pillar wasn't in there yet. But what we saw is this is a great research-based best practice in terms of the different elements communities should be looking at to be successful in the digital economy. So we scrapped the visioning session and said, let's use this framework to guide our direction moving forward. So the other thing we also wanted to be focusing on was the smart city piece. And I know for me, I really needed to wrap my head around the language of intelligent community and smart city. So whenever I do outreach, I always highlight the overlap between them. And the way I like to explain it is smart cities is really about your local government and how they're using tools to engage with local citizens and also to find efficiencies for citizens. So a great example that I picked up on was Kingston, Ontario had an app where their local citizens could interact in any way they needed to with local government through their smartphone. So whether it's looking up garbage pickup, paying bills, all the information was there at their fingertips. So again, when we're talking to communities, we like to share that the smart cities piece is very important, and getting local government to look at how they're delivering services is an important part of the overall intelligent communities piece, which we see as being more broad and also ultimately about prosperity for the community. So what were some of the benefits we saw? And I think Roberto and John and Robert have touched on some of these, but really the benefits we saw were it's a way to keep youth in our community and make them know that there's jobs here for them in the future. It's a way for people to basically import jobs. And we know that people come to our region to live because of the lifestyle, but often something that's essential and that they don't want to give up is to have rewarding, fulfilling work. And it's also a way to improve our lifestyle. So in a rural setting, access to healthcare is often a challenge. So if there's a way we can improve access to education and telehealth, that's ultimately going to improve our quality of life. And then, of course, improving services for citizens. So why did we see Nelson as a good fit? And this is going back to looking at the assets of your community and what you can build on. So some of the things we recognized is that in Nelson, we had our local city bringing in dark fiber. So our local government was bringing in the broadband infrastructure. And then regionally, we have an organization that's looking to connect our rural communities with broadband. We also have higher education in the region. So we have a local college that's creating knowledge workers that we could be building on. We know we have an area where people want to live. So we have the attraction piece, but we need to make it easier for people to work from our area. We also face barriers like transportation, being in a remote corner of the southeastern corner of BC. Wintertime highway driving, unreliable airports can really be a challenge for our businesses, but using broadband helps overcome those barriers. We also saw it as an opportunity to strengthen our traditional sectors, so sectors like forestry and agriculture, by helping them adopt technology to make their businesses more competitive. And the other thing we saw is that we already have a creative class working here. We have a number of people and companies working out of their basements. And so we saw an opportunity to grow that. So this is just a list of some of the businesses that were already operating in our community. Software companies working in online facilitation, retreat booking software, mountain biking films, graphic design, online app development, and real estate software. So we already had companies doing it, and so this is where we saw an opportunity to grow that sector. Again, as I mentioned, we have a local post-secondary school. Some of the programs they offer are a digital arts program and a School of the Arts program. We had a really active volunteer who had started a technology club for youth, and he was doing once a week drop-in meetups out of a location at the college where youth could come in and basically tinker with 3D printers and online software. So we saw that as a great opportunity that we could support. And since we've started this project, that group has actually now moved into the youth center, which we see as being a great fit in that, people go into the youth center to skateboard, to play around in the music room. Well, now we have technology there as well. So we're going to them as opposed to expecting them to come to us. We have a fantastic local nonprofit theater, which I believe is actually streaming this webinar today. So I want to say hello to the people in the theater and encourage them, if they want to get involved, to feel free to come talk to me at Community Futures. But again, we have a fairly well-established film industry and independent people working in film. So we saw that as another asset for our community. And then the theater is wanting to build up that sector as well. So we see opportunities for a great partnership there. So how did we get started? So in 2013, we started with the education piece. And I think this really goes back to advocacy, in that we invited local government, economic development practitioners, business owners, and we had a full day where we talked about the need to transition to a broadband economy. So we had academics from Selkirk College talk about the fact that resource industries tend to be boom bust, whereas with broadband economy, we tend to see more stability. We also had a speaker talk about just the transition to online and technology, and that this is really the direction the world is going, and we need to get on board. And then we were fortunate to have Paul West join us as our keynote speaker. And Paul came from Stratford, Ontario, which was one of the top 7 smart communities. So he shared the Stratford experience in terms of how they became an intelligent community. So that's really where we started things and got people in the community thinking about where we could be going with this. The next step we took was we hosted what we called a strategic doing session. And actually the strategic doing philosophy also comes out of Purdue University. So we had some trainers come up and train us on the strategic doing format. And what that's really about is, strategic planning is great, but what are we going to do, and what are we going to do tomorrow? So we had an open invitation to the community where we invited thinkers and doers to come learn about the Intelligent Community platform, review the assets we have in the community, and organize themselves around the Intelligent Community pillars, and walk away with projects that everybody was going to work on. So what came out of that session? We had 63 people just come out of the community. It was, I think, a Thursday night in February. We maybe promoted it for 2 weeks in advance, and it was a really good cross-section of people in the community that came out. The projects that came out of that session were, from a broadband perspective, identifying that our local residents and businesses didn't understand the difference between broadband and dial-up, and what they actually needed for their purpose. So we understood that we needed to do a better job of educating our community about the infrastructure that's available, and the costs, and the pros and cons and the benefits of it. We also saw that we needed more knowledge worker training, specifically in the tech sector. So our tech companies are struggling to find local talent. So we need to figure out a way to offer that programming locally. There was a very motivated group that wanted to see the creation of a Nelson Innovation Center. So I'll talk a bit more about that. Our nonprofit sector saw that for us to promote digital equality and inclusion, our nonprofits that deliver a number of our social services, they needed better technology in order to work with their clients. So that's where they needed to start. And then we also recognize that we've got a lot of great talent doing very cool work in our community, and we wanted to promote them through a Meet the Geeks campaign. The feedback from that event was fantastic, as you can see from some of the stats on the screen. And it was a really good experience that just kickstarted our project and really got the broader community engaged. So what are some of the projects that have happened since then? So one of the things we saw is that we really wanted to drive uptake of technology and broadband through our local business community. So we've offered one-on-one coaching with businesses from a consultant that goes in, understands their business goals, and then recommends tech applications to achieve those business goals. Our Selkirk College has now designed a web application development program. So they engaged in local industry, understood what the needs were, and they've submitted an application for funding to have that program launch. So we were able to influence our local post-secondary to deliver training that aligns with our sector's needs. One of our biggest successes, and this really ties in with the innovation piece, is we've done a lot of groundwork around building our innovation ecosystem. And really, this all comes down to community building. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a number of people working out of their basements doing really interesting work around the world. but there wasn't a local community between those individuals. So about 2 years ago, we launched a Facebook group where we labeled it the Nelson Tech and Knowledge Workers Facebook group. In a community of 10,000, we have over 600 people that are very active on that page. And it can be reaching out about, hey, I'm looking for somebody to do this kind of work for me. Does anybody know anybody? People saying, hey, I'm thinking of moving to town. What's the sector like there? We have monthly meetups where we have speakers and networking, and typically we see about 75 people come out to those. We also started a chapter of something called Startup Nelson. So Startup Canada is a federal or a national nonprofit to build community around entrepreneurs. So we've also launched that. We've helped build our screen-based industry through a partnership with the Civic Theatre. And they have over 160 members there that meet monthly and are networking. And something that we've piloted over the last year is something called Canadians Learning Code. So again, we have set up a Nelson chapter of Canadians Learning Code where we have volunteers teaching coding and programming on a monthly basis. And in the meantime, we're working on launching a Nelson Innovation Center. So the reason why we want to do this is we want to be able to position ourselves as leaders in digital innovation. We want to drive success for our tech businesses, and we also want the ability to attract and retain tech workers. So what do we envision taking place out of our innovation center? Parachuting that community building piece that's already happening into this bricks and mortar location. We want to be offering mentorship from our successful companies to our startup companies. We're going to offer tailored programs for the technology sector in terms of business startup and acceleration. We're looking at having specific capital funds available through the Innovation Center, and then also looking at industry outpost programming, so helping businesses solve problems by matching them up with tech and knowledge workers. In terms of the advocacy piece, something that we've done is showcase our successful businesses in the area. So a way we've done that is through podcasts called You Can Do That Here, where we profile interesting businesses and people working from the area. And so back in the summer of 2016, we submitted our application to be recognized as an intelligent community, and we're very pleased when we made the SMART 21. We were told at the time we were one of the smallest communities that had ever been recognized by the Intelligent Communities Forum, so we were very excited about that. And we continue to work on becoming recognized as an intelligent community. So some of the projects that we've identified as upcoming projects is continuing to drive adoption from our local businesses, continuing to influence having more post-secondary tech-related programming. We know we need housing solutions and looking at embedding things like broadband in our housing solutions, launching and expanding our innovation sector, supporting our social sector in providing access to technology, continuing to work with our local government in expanding on their citizen-related tech tools, and then promoting our region externally as a tech community. So that's what we see as the next steps for our community. And I'll leave it there and happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Andrea. Appreciate it. I don't have the time for a lot of them, but there's just one thing I want to go to that you referenced, which I think is a very important point. Obviously, a city of 10,000 plus people, you've got basically the innovation infrastructure normally found in a place 10 times your size or 50, 100 times your size. Oops, I'm apparently not doing what. How about if we show that? That's better. The question I have for you is really the supply and demand questions. One of the hardest things for an intelligent community at the place you are is you've worked really hard to build this knowledge workforce. You've got the broadband asset for them to operate on. You've got some of these companies, but you constantly need to be balancing the supply of new folks coming in and being generated by your educational system with your employer community. How do you think about that? So what was Andrea? There you are.
Robert, the last part of your question cut out there, but I think what you're asking is how do we balance attracting tech workers with finding room for them in our community? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, attracting, but also, making your own,
Yes.
building your own knowledge workforce as well. Yes. How do you just, it's a never ending project. So how do you approach
Yes.
that?
Yeah, so in terms of the attracting piece, we've identified the housing issue is a significant challenge for us. Our local government has some great short and long-term strategies in terms of developing new housing in the area. So we see a solution there in the longer term. With the Innovation Center, we are looking at, can we have a temporary residential component to that to help alleviate some of the pains there. The thing to remember as well is that although we're a population of 10,000, we have a large surrounding rural area. So we often have people that will live 20 minutes outside of our community and commute in. And then, of course, the other piece of it is looking at how can we encourage our youth and our high school students, our post-secondary students, to stay in the community and develop the skills to work in this sector. So that's something we're working on as well. We had a meeting with our college and our post-secondary just on Friday to talk about how can we showcase these career paths to youth and get them connecting with people working in the tech sector to have a sense of what jobs are out there and ways that they could plan to raise their family and live in this community for the long term.
Well, that is actually what success looks like. So I wish you lots of luck with that. And we're going to turn over to a second example, a very different kind of setting. Nelson shows what's possible in a pretty small place, far from urban centers. And we want to turn next to quite a different place, which is South Island, Victoria, BC, right across from Vancouver, and hear from Emily de Rosenroll, who's the CEO of South Island Prosperity. Emily, are you with us?
Hi, sorry, I'm with you. Hi, everybody. My name is Emily de Rosenroll, and I'm the CEO of the South Island Prosperity Project. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to first introduce our organization. We're the South Island Prosperity Project. So based here in Greater Victoria region, in the capital of British Columbia, we are a private-public partnership dedicated to regional economic development. And we were formed back in April 2016, so not long ago, just under 2 years, with 28 members, and today we have now 40 members. Today we have 10 local governments. So as you all know, in the Capital Regional District, we have 13 governments, or you may not know. I didn't before I moved here. We also have 5 First Nation communities and 3 post-secondary institutions, 2 nonprofits, 5 industry and sector associations, and 15 private sector members. So here are a few of our members here. I think all of them, except for the last 3 First Nation communities. So why were we established? I think I'm pulling on some of the themes that have already been brought up today, but we're certainly here to sort of build that ecosystem, the environment that allows for conditions to enable prosperity. So here I'll just show you a few of our the things that we focus on. One is diversifying and strengthening the regional economy. We also look at promoting better employment opportunities for increased quality of life for citizens of the region, providing support for entrepreneurs and businesses, maximizing federal and provincial funding for regional development, collaborating, so partnerships, again, right in our bylaws here, and raising the profile for the South Vancouver Island. So many of the things that you are all focused on and are somewhat traditional economic development. So as you can see, we have a very broad understanding of prosperity. So prosperity is something that is not just about the economy, but it also involves people. So that's right at the heart of what we do. We have used the word prosperity very deliberately because it is an inclusive term that refers to the economy, but also people and planet. So here you can see our vision is to create a collaborative region that is a vibrant place to live and work, and for many years to come. So sustainability and the creation of household sustaining jobs. Knowing that this is an area that is very expensive to live, that is something that is at the center of our focus. So, this is the tagline that I use quite often because it really gets at the heart of why we actually exist. So why do you bother diversifying the economy in the first place? And it's for a clear reason. Economic development is extremely personal. It's so that the kids, your kids, our kids, can stay home for dinner on Sunday nights, which means can they actually be staying in Victoria, Greater Victoria, to find meaningful careers or start companies, etc., instead of going off to different places. And I think that's something that, whatever the reasons are for your, the concerns of the obstacles in your community, we all have them. That is something that brings us together. So having said all of this stuff, what do we actually do? Because there's lots of ways to take all of this into practice, and I'll give you a few examples. First of all, we look at 4 major different areas. This is our value chain here. We look at business growth and expansion, investment attraction, and business attraction, First Nations economic development, sector and cluster development. And those are all supported by our internal processes, our marketing, our communications, our research, our governance, our policies, and so forth. And all of those, if done properly, will lead to an increased number of household sustaining jobs and allow us to attract more public and private investment. So what does that sort of translate to? And now that we've talked about the why, I'm going to move on to focusing on the how. So how do we do these things? We really believe in building an ecosystem, focusing on partnerships, and we do that through, this is a handy acronym for us, FACE, which is facilitating, accelerating, connecting, or catalyzing, and enabling. And that means what a lot of our focus is about bringing together the partners that can enable projects to happen, especially partnerships between public and private sector, which I believe is a really strong tool that is increasingly being used, especially in smart cities approaches, and looking at the ecosystem as the glue or the connective tissue that brings us all together. So a few concrete examples for you. One is the Songhees Innovation Center, which is a project we launched with Songhees last year. We look at First Nations economic development in a few different ways, but one of this is by developing something called the Innovation Center, which is a co-working space and incubator, if you will, to look at how do we support better entrepreneurship, and also different ways of viewing entrepreneurship that include social entrepreneurship, include sort of micro enterprises, and all of these different ways of thinking out of the box about what sort of model or vehicle you use to bring your ideas to market. Another example is the Smart South Island initiative. And this is something that is really the backbone of everything that we do. It's our sort of strategic, it's our strategic foundation. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more this afternoon, but that includes the federal government, the challenge that we all know about. But it's also in all sorts of things that we do. So how we think about our investment attraction, it's how we think about our entrepreneurship support and our business development. And of course, at the heart of that is innovation. I'll give you a few examples of what we've been doing. One is the Smart South Island Symposium. So we brought together over 300 residents, entrepreneurs, businesses together to look at how do we conceive of ourselves, where do we want to be in the future, what kind of economy do we want to be when we grow up, and how can being smarter help that? So how can being smart enable the sort of future that you're looking for? And I think that's really important so that we don't put technology too much ahead of the purpose, and that we ensure that technology is a tool that serves us and not vice versa. So we also kicked off our own South Island Smart or Open Innovation Challenge to try to encourage more connection between the Economic Development Agency, which is often a bit of a silo in itself, and how do we break that open and really encourage different types of innovation and exposure to people from all kinds of disciplines and walks of life. So we've done a lot to do that, and the South Island Open Innovation Challenge is one of the primary vehicles for that. We had 69 applications come forward. Now we've moved into round 2, 10 finalists, and we'll be able to choose 3 winners for the chance to win $15,000 prizes and be part of our Dragon's Den style symposium in March. So that's been a lot of fun. We did a lot of public outreach, information sessions. We did a big roadshow to get quite a lot of involvement, and it's really neat some of the ideas that have come forward. The last project I'll tell you about is our South Island Prosperity Index. And that's another way to really convene people and get them together to start talking about your economy and your region and where you want to be in the future. So data, having a data-centered narrative in economic development, I think is really critical. And what we've done, and you can take lots of different approaches, ICF has some great tools as well, but we looked at ISO standards, which are International Standards Organization standards, and looking at monitoring the same metrics year after year to really see how we're progressing. So how do you choose, the right projects for your community? What we've done here is we've set our own impact criteria, and we'll take on projects that will move the needle. Will they actually help us advance our strategic plan? Will they drive economic growth that's both sustainable in the short and long term, and that's consistent with our values? Will it stimulate more investment in the local community, either from public or private sources? So that allows us to really narrow our focus so we don't try to do too much all at the same time. And I'll just leave you with a last thought about how what we've learned in our first 2 years as a startup in and of ourselves, and that's that your own organization can really be an innovative force. And I think that taking a page from outside in innovation, as it's sometimes called, where you really immerse yourself in the needs and the desires of your clients, of your customers, and you remember that as organizations that serve the public, we are not just we can't just look at our customers as being our funders or our sponsors, but also the beneficiaries of what we do. So the public at large, and how are we actually allowing for this sort of inclusive view of prosperity that takes everyone along on the ride. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Emily. That was very, very interesting. You've added a new thread to our conversation, which is, I think, an important one, and that is this idea that cultural and social entrepreneurship can be as powerful a contributor as business entrepreneurship. I was smiling while you were speaking, because one of Canada's biggest cities, Montreal, is passionate about this, has done a tremendous amount in it. And now here's, I see the same thing in smaller places, and indeed some extremely small places. But could you just talk very briefly with us, what is the value that you see for South Island in promoting social and cultural entrepreneurship?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, I think that it's creating that sense of community and finding the culture. I mean, it's important for a number of reasons. One, for telling the story, the aspirational story of what we want to do in the future. I think having that common language or common playbook is really something that can't be underestimated. The power of ambition or dreaming or pursuing something, a change. So that I think is really key, just from for bringing people together. But also in terms of how do you do then your investment attraction work, and what's the community you're trying to attract people to, and how do you then help businesses retain workers, because quality of life is just critical to retention and recruitment.
Agreed. Quality of life has actually become a huge factor that is actually plays to the benefit of places like British Columbia. So we have to pass on to keep on schedule, but thank you very much for sharing this insight into what South Island is doing, and as I say, adding some new depth to our conversation. Let me finish up our discussion about the ICF method. You're going to see that some part of your population and segment of your business community are not going to follow you into this digital economy. They are offline. They are minimally online. One of my favorite examples was a business in a small community where the owner was on in years, and he just refused to do anything about social media, online, anything. And then he hired this young woman to run his store for him. And she finally got so frustrated that without telling him, she set up a website and did some social media and began promoting things. And his sales went up, and he said, well, this is terrific. Why are sales going up? And she sort of shamefacedly had to confess to him why. And he was just incredibly excited, and of course, a convert. Now, in general, we know who's most likely to be on the wrong side of the digital divide. It's going to be people who are low income. It's going to be people who have low levels of educational attainment, which are often, of course, the same group. It's going to be older citizens who are encountering digital technologies in their last decades with us, and also just people who are in areas that are underserved for broadband. How do you go at this? Well, you already heard it a couple of times. One issue you're going to attack on is access. And the most common approach is to provide free use of computers and broadband at local libraries, free Wi-Fi in a variety of locations. More ambitious communities also take technology to the people rather than asking them all to come to the library. So they'll put workstations into public buildings and community centers and elderly housing and low-income housing. But access isn't enough because people also need the ability. In those libraries and community centers and other public spaces, they also host scheduled classes for beginners and intermediate users. And often that's in partnership with a local school, community college, technology school. More ambitious communities will tend to add an ad hoc tech support person, either in person or by telephone, and even one-on-one instructions for people who are truly challenged by the classes. And this stuff is just incredibly powerful in opening the world to people. And finally, and in something that I think is often neglected, the third leg of this stool is something that not that many communities do, but when they do it, I think it's extremely important. And that is they work on attitude. It's easy for those of us who are digitally literate to underestimate just the hurdle that's required to actually get online and to understand how this stuff works. And if you don't have access to it, you don't know why. You don't really know why you need it. And so people need a reason, or some people will need a reason. And for them, the single most powerful motivator usually is culture. It may be an ethnic tradition. It may be a discovery of a heritage. We all know older citizens who've gotten excited about online genealogy. It may be a burning social issue that affects them. Whatever it is, these are things that particularly a local government can help put online and attract users to. And it can really make a huge difference. British Columbia offers a really remarkable example of digital equality as it applies actually to an entire village. And so we're going to talk next to someone who can tell us about that. That is the village of Grand Isle, and we're going to be hearing from its CEO, Brenda Anderson. Brenda?
All right. Thank you very much. I want to welcome you to the village of Grand Isle, and we're located on the shores of beautiful Babine Lake. And we're going to tell you our story of our initial steps on moving forward from a resource-based community to a connected community, desperately seeking some digital equality. So Grand Isle is a rural village in British Columbia, and we're located 1,100 kilometers from the U.S. border. And yes, our population is only 300. Actually, I think we're at 305 right now, so we're very happy about that. And we're located in the north central interior. We're 4 hours west of Prince George, and we're 4 hours east of Terrace. And we were a community developed in the late 1960s. We were one of the last mining towns in BC to be constructed. So this was a town that was constructed to facilitate mining operations. And we had 2 open pit copper mines. And the town actually became a municipality. It was incorporated in 1971. And we are a full town. There is everything a town would have. There's arenas, there's curling rinks, there's marinas, there's school, there's clinic, wastewater treatment plants, all the wonderful amenities. But as with all mines have a lifespan. And as the ore plays out and copper prices drop, what happens, of course, is that they actually close. So in 1986, a major closure and small rally, and then the community actually saw final closure in 1992. So what happens? What happens is that you have a peak population of 3,000 people, and over a period of 3 years, your population goes to approximately 500, and quickly after that, in another 2 years, you're down to the population of 300. So mass evacuation from the community, leaving a whole lot of infrastructure behind. So what happens when your only industry leaves town? Well, your housing assets are all owned by the mine except for some individual homes that were purchased by people. So they sell off the assets. And we actually had houses that were loaded onto transport trucks and moved down the road. School enrollment drops. Any small retail sector that you have disappears. The village itself struggles to maintain infrastructure developed and meant to operate with a much larger population as well as an industry base. So services to residents become limited, and I don't mean just municipal services, I mean services as a whole. And as this goes on, the community feels quite beaten, and I think the community has a tendency to become very insular. It's what do we do from here, right? So how do we begin? How do we begin? During the period that led up to where we changed, the community went for 15 years where it sought out government support. It looked at ways to try to keep the community together and how do we move forward from here. And I think one of the conscious decisions that the community made was not to become another BC mining ghost town. And as you may know, we have a number of them in the province that were built to support mines, and when the mines left, everything left. So where does the community begin to redefine itself? You need leadership. You need a council that is willing to stand up and say to your community, we're not going to be an industry-based town anymore. We're going to be something else. And how are we going to become that? And you need community support to be able to do that. And the community has to trust that their leadership is leading them in a direction that is appropriate for the residents that you have, because at the moment you're not in the place where you can actually attract new residents. So how this process began was with a holistic assessment of the community. And we started with taking inventory of what we had. So this is Grand Isle, right here on the shores of Babine Lake. This is the longest natural freshwater lake in BC. It's 177 kilometers long. But as with many resource-based communities, the community turned its back on the waterfront and the lake. It didn't really matter, right? They were about ore extraction. We weren't about a lake. We weren't about tourism or economic development opportunities that focused on that. And we just have to include a beautiful shot. This is kayaking early in the morning. Now, the other thing that we're located just off the Fulton River, which is one of the largest man-made spawning channels for sockeye salmon in the world. Actually, I think it is the largest. So we have some things going for us. The other thing that we have is we have a very interesting demographic in our community. We have 70% seniors. The majority of our population are over the age of 67. So this creates some interesting challenges and dynamics. So if we're moving forward, what are we going to do first? Well, first we want to retain the current population that we have, and we want to get services to them in the very best way that we can before we can start going out and inviting people in. So a lot of our services and supports and programs that we've developed have been senior focused. We want accessibility for all to everywhere within the community. We want social inclusion. We want communication and connectivity, because you better believe those grandparents want to be able to get a hold of their grandkids. They want to be able to see videos of what they're doing. They want to be able to have that outreach. We want community transportation because, let's face it, these seniors are on the road and sometimes that's a little scary. We also want health services because we want to be able to maintain this population as long as we can. So in that process, we began looking at the community. And it's interesting because we didn't use the ICF model, but for us, many of the principles that we've seen today actually were things that were very important to our community as it was looking at itself. We talked about transportation, we talked about housing, we talked about social participation, outdoor spaces and buildings, supports and health services, respect and inclusion, civic participation and jobs, but most importantly was communication and information for us, because we were lacking. We were so lacking in how we were able to communicate with the rest of the world. So one of the key areas we focused on for development was our communications. We were an area without cell phone service, and we were an area without high-speed internet. So to begin this process, we needed to develop strong working relationships with what was then Network BC, which is now the telecommunications department with the Ministry of Citizens and Services. We developed and we council maintained a consistent message to government focusing on the need for cell phone service. High-speed internet, we needed it to provide high speed with significant bandwidth. We needed secure funding to be able to develop it. We needed ongoing high-level technical support. So the internet was developed in our community in 2007, and we had had a very limited function and had 25 customers. And it operates as a self-funded department of the Village of Granelle, so we're the ISP provider. We have been very fortunate in securing grants in 2010, 2012, 2015, and 16 through the Connecting Citizens program, the Canada 150 program, Northern Development Initiative Trust, as well as Connecting BC program. So it has, without them, we couldn't have moved forward in the way that we have. But the most significant advancement for Granelle and the area was laying of fiber along the 48 kilometers from Highway 16 to along Highway 118 in 2014 and 15. Without fiber, without that backbone, we can't do any of this. What the fiber allowed to happen was that cell phone service became a reality for the area. And it gave us the bandwidth we desperately needed to turn around and develop our internet. And it couldn't have happened without it. And I know there's many areas of the province where you don't have access to the bandwidth that you need. And this is critical to make this whole thing work and move forward. So we're a wireless system. And that means that although the fiber comes to the community, all our pushing out of our signal comes through wireless, and we're all on towers, and we have a number of them, and that presents its interesting challenges all unto itself. I have to give a huge shout out to Itenica Technologies, who has been with us since the inception in 2007. And without that strong technical support, a community such as ours couldn't have done this. We needed to have someone who was our go-to with this, and that's what we have. This tower here on your left is a 150-foot tower that we needed to build into an area of our community that has heavy tree growth, and we couldn't get a wireless signal through to it. We also have taken, if you take a look at the right, we actually have hotspots that we provided to all our local campgrounds, and they work quite well. We're very happy with it. The rest is just pieces of what we do. This is how our system works, and it's really quite fascinating because we're a system made up of small towers that are located along the lake, which allows us to do a number of different things. So we have towers within the community which bounce our signal out to our residents and to the businesses in the area, but we're also bouncing our signal across Babine Lake. So this is an intermittent tower, and then the Bell Mine Site Tower that operate a water treatment system, and we actually provide service to them by bouncing our signal all the way across the lake, and it allows them to monitor their water treatment through a SCADA system. We have an east tower, and our east tower is solely supported by solar and wind power because it's in a semi-remote area, and it broadcasts our signal back across the lake, all along the lakefront to the regional district and to other homes and businesses within the area. So what we do is a little bit of a challenge. What we achieve is awesome. We have had, with the fiber coming into the community, we have at our very small elementary and secondary school, they have the ability to use technology to provide additional programming that they were never able to do before. And can do now. And our local health center actually offers video conferencing for patients to actually have discussions with their doctors right online and not have to leave the community to be able to do that. Connecting and supporting business, we don't have a lot, so we really like to support the businesses that we have. Senga Gardner operates the Granelle Resort, and one of her favorite statements is there's no point in being here if we're not connected. People can't find us, they don't want to stay because they want to be able to access the outside world when they're here. And our Shadi, our pharmacist, chose our community last year, and his business is very new. And he operates his business with a Cisco audio system, and he actually uses technology to be able to facilitate it. So he's connecting to the outside world, and we're actually providing service in Grand Isle, which for us is a real boon. As a village, we're looking currently what we use right now is we have a web-based accounting system. We take electronic payments. We're able to collect camping fees at campsites using portable cell phone, and it allows us to participate in webinars such as this and online training. And you have to realize that before the fiber was here, the system wasn't stable enough for us to actually accomplish that. We have a state-of-the-art biomass system, and it's all electronically monitored, and we use the internet very specifically for that. What we want is to be able to see SCADA systems into both water and wastewater, and we want online communications with staff and more computerized operations because that's going to create some more efficiencies for us. Our next steps, we want to continue to attract and retain young families to the community, and that's a challenge because they need employment. And I'm so appreciative of some of the ideas and the concepts that are out there from the other presenters today because I think it gives us a real idea of where we want to go and how we may want to get there. But as a community, we want to provide opportunities for intergenerational interaction. Right now, we're developing a program in which our students in our school will be using tablets and smartphones to actually teach our seniors in our community how to use them and how to make use of that information that they have on them. We want to search out ways to attract and retain talent. We want to continue to seek investment opportunities in both tourism and the business sector. So how did we get here? We got here through strong leadership. Our council has been consistent in its message both to government and to community, how important it is for us to move forward and to invite the world into the community and how do we connect. Participation and inclusion. We have complete community participation in almost all aspects of what we're doing. We want them to feel involved, we want them to feel included, and they have a voice in where we're going and how we're going to get there. And we do conscious planning. And conscious planning for us is we take those basic concepts of who we are and what we are, and we float them through everything that we're looking at doing and how we're doing them. I want to just leave you with a few shots of where we are because this is why we fight so hard for this community to stay alive and for what it has to offer. It's an amazing area. Oh, and this is just one of my favorites. This is a rubber-tired pathway that flows through our park. Seniors love it. They can't wait to walk on it. It's very user-friendly. And of course, Grand Isle in the wintertime, right now I can't see over the snowbanks out of the office. We have so much snow. This was earlier on in the season. And this is one of our counselors who's 72 years old, can't wait to get out on a sled. So what is our dream? Our dream is it all. We want to be a smart community. We want our community to see that growth and development. We want to take advantage of everything that technology has to offer us. So yeah, we want digital equality. So this is where you find us, and that's my presentation.
Well, Brenda, thank you very much. That was truly inspiring. And I want to just try to get you to do something for me, which is if you have to say in a sentence, maybe 2 sentences, why is it that you're not a BC mining ghost town?
Oh, that's a really good question. Why are we not? We're not because people believed in their community all along. And I think they were on their way, very much on their way to becoming a ghost town. But council of the day made the decision to say, we can't be what we were. We have to be something more and we have to be something different. So what is that going to be and how are we going to get there?
Sheer bloody-minded determination. It's the oldest story in the world, and bless you for having that. We're going to, actually, John, did you say you wanted to get into this at this point? Silence gives consent. Just don't go away, Brenda. Actually, there you are.
I'm finally unmuted. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We only have a couple more minutes, so I'd like to just thank everyone, particularly Brenda, using technology to get in another back door if you could, was a good example of how to use your innovation and skills. I was really impressed with what you were talking about in Grand Isle, your own ISP. Your community participates in all activities. You've been able to attract talent, all that. I mean, for a community of 300 people, if you can do it, then certainly anybody can do it. So I would just like to commend you and your community for everything that you're doing. What I'm really interested in, is a very quick question, is the same thing that Roberto said. You have to undertake an inventory first. Did you find going through that process, you can't really, you can't really plan for anything unless you measure it. And I guess it's taking off the question. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So how important was that then in the early stages of your work?
Extremely important, extremely important. And by doing inventory of what you are, it's interesting because one of the dynamics of resource-based communities, if there's water associated with them, they turn their back on the water. And it doesn't matter whether it's a river or a lake or whatever you may have, because it's not important in the structure. And one of the key things was getting people to recognize that if we want growth and development, we need to turn around, if you like, and face the water and invite what it can provide for us into the community. And the only way to do that is with having the digital technology to be able to support that.
Well, thank you again, and thanks everybody. We're very close to time, and there's still a couple of things to do. Robert Bell, you have the end of your presentation still to work on, do you?
That is correct.
Okay. So thanks, Brenda, and we'll go back to Robert now.
Brenda, thank you. Okay, in fact, last of the six things that we care about are sustainability, and I think we just heard an impassioned reason why sustainability counts. And it is, of course, it's a global issue, right? But we're going to talk about it as a local matter, very much as we talked about with Grand Isle. It's about quality of life and health. It's about facing the waterfront, not turning your back to it. And it's also, however, about money. Turning polluted lands into productive assets, reducing waste in ways that save taxpayers money. It is about growth. Sustainability is a growth industry, whether we're talking about materials or technology, consulting or new products. It relates, of course, to broadband and information technology because they are the things that make possible telecommuting, that make possible remote work, reducing vehicle trips. Smart communities are using technology, smart grid technologies, water management systems, all being run digitally to do more for less money and with less impact on the planet. And finally, and I think this is certainly what I find most inspiring about this, is it's about community. Sustainability projects tend to attract community support, and one of the things that we encourage communities very much to do is to not just have the discussion about sustainability programs take place in council and inside the walls of government. Reach out, involve the community in setting priorities, in developing projects and taking action. It does take longer, but boy, does it produce results that go far beyond the value of the projects. So how do communities do this? It's going to look fairly familiar. Local government works with, you guessed it, citizens, institutions, and businesses to set priorities based on concerns, to do it in a very collaborative fashion. And from that, they produce a plan. And it's a plan. It needs to be public. It needs to have engagement. It needs to be the document that the community owns because that is going to guide what happens next. Is going to basically create the goals that you're shooting for and create some accountability over actually reaching those goals. From that comes all the sorts of projects that are familiar to us, from citizen action and public changes to public procurement, carbon reduction projects, smarter property development, waste reduction, conservation, on and on it goes. And these things together give back to the people for whom we're doing everything. It gives back cost savings, it gives back quality of life improvements, and it is a tremendous builder of community pride. And I think we haven't talked about it specifically that much in this program, but I think you've seen, certainly in the example of Grand Isle, how this operates and the kind of impact it can have. So I'm done. I just want to let you know that we've thrown a great deal of information at you in a short time, and if you're going to ride that wave of the digital economy, you're going to need some help. So the province will be publishing our printed guide From Connectivity to Community. And that's something you can look forward to in the next couple of months. I want to thank very much our panelists for putting a bunch of abstract ideas into very real context, and thank all of you for hanging in there with us. So, John, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Robert, and thanks to all the panelists. Really appreciate the time and effort you've put into this. We have a couple more minutes and some very interesting information for all of you, so please do stay on the line for a few more minutes. Two things I'd like you to do. One is, if you haven't filled out the survey that was sent to you over the last couple of days, please do continue to fill them out and send them back to us. They're certainly going to help our organizers a great deal. But we do have some results so far from the polls that or from the survey that we've asked. So for instance, this is a combined results of questions 8 and 9. The last two, a couple of questions that we asked were going to be originally a webinar whiteboard, but we decided to do it as part of the survey. And what it tells us here is, what are your community's main needs and main priorities? So the answers that came back in both question 8 and question 9 seem to be the same. So we combined them into this one chart. You can see that your community's needs are housing and the cost of living, the issues around affordability were very high. In fact, there was a question by Andrea and the folks from Nelson about how Nelson's a very cool place to live, but there's a great issue about affordability. There's a degree of poverty of 20% of the folks having that issue. So that continues as a big item, affordability and housing. Sustainability is a very important part. So this is a key issue for that ICF does tackle. Economic development is a key priority among your communities, and taking advantage and leveraging tourism opportunities, security, and attracting knowledge workforce, and so forth. So these are quite interesting. But do send in the rest of the survey from the rest of the folks out there, and that'll help us to finalize this, and we'll certainly make this available in our reports. There's one last one that we had as a survey, and that was, what does the term smart city mean to you? You can see that most people thought that it meant the holistic approach, talking about sustainability. Smart communities talk a lot about broadband infrastructure and digital equality and so forth. We'll tackle that in a few minutes again, just near the end when we close this session. Okay, now to the poll itself. We have 5 quick questions, and we would like you to answer these over the next 5 minutes. First of all, the first question. Based on what you heard today, how ready is your community to take the journey to become fully digital? 5 is most ready, and 1 is least ready. Please take an opportunity to vote. We'll wait for just a couple of seconds. Okay. Let's see what we got out of this. Based on what you heard today, how ready is your community? Not very ready at the front end. Quite a lot of people answered quite ready. Sort of in the middle point. Very good. No one answered least ready. So there's a quick poll. We're going to go to the second question. Second question is, based on what you heard today, where do you think your community needs to focus its efforts? Please select 1. Broadband infrastructure, knowledge workforce, innovation ecosystem, sustainability resiliency, or digital inclusion, advocacy, and citizen participation. Please select 1, and these are from the pillars of the ICF. Okay, let's see what results we got. All right, broadband infrastructure and innovation ecosystem seem to be, and also digital inclusion, all seem to be the 3 key areas that a community needs to focus its efforts. Thank you. Let's go to question 3. Do you see a role for you or your organization in becoming digital? Yes, maybe, or no? Let's wait a second. Okay, let's see the results. All right, do you see a role for yourself? Majority of people said yes. Okay, thank you very much. And next question. Do you see value in collaborating with neighboring communities on common problems? Select 1. Yes, maybe, or no. Let's see what the results are. Overwhelmingly yes. Thank you. All right, and the last poll question. Do you think that the smart or intelligent community approach would help to achieve success in your community? Please select 1. Yes, maybe, or no. Let's see what the results are on this one. Well, there you go. Yes. So perhaps there may be opportunities for further dialogue with some of the communities around the smart and intelligent community approach. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And what we're going to do is we'll make this these charts and the poll information available as part of our final documentation. Okay, what I'd like to do now is I would like to bring Susan back on for some concluding comments. Susan, are you there?
Hi, John.
It's
Thanks
been a
very
long
much.
morning.
It's been a long morning, but a great one. I continue to be really inspired when I hear the stories from communities and the pathways that they've taken towards digital maturity and digital inclusion and equality, and what that's actually meaning, the benefits that they're beginning to realize.
Okay, let's hear what you have to say about your concluding comments.
So, for us, for the province, this is our first foray into a master class to look at digital inclusion, moving into the smart community space, particularly for BC communities. So I'm really looking forward to additional feedback and additional conversations with those of you who are able to participate, and to see where the conversation leads. We'd like to be able to get more involved and provide more information to communities to assist as they move forward. The passion and commitment is clearly evident through the presentations today from Andrea, from Brenda, and from the rest of the presenters. It is that mix of innovation combined with pragmatic doggedness to see this through. And the commitment was just palpable, I think. So the province is absolutely committed to see where we can parachute in to help, whether it's looking at projects that support digital infrastructure, utilizing the connectivity handbook we talked about earlier, or what we can do to assist in breaking down some of those next steps for communities as they pursue the smart community model.
Terrific.
And that's
well, thank
it for
you.
me.
We want to thank Susan and the province for hosting us today. We want to thank Professor Gallardo, Robert Bell, and all the panelists for their presentations and answers to some great questions. Finally, and by the way, we have a lot more questions that were possible. So maybe we need to do this again sometime, because there were a lot of questions that just weren't all answered. We also want to thank ICF's Matt Owen for producing this webinar and keeping us straight. We'll now be taking an hour break, and if you are registered for the next webinar on the Smart Cities Challenge, please come back at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If not, please look for follow-up correspondence from ICF and from the province of British Columbia regarding this initiative. As I say, the recording will be available next week. We valued your input, and we valued all of you attending today. Thank you very much. And as you can see on the screen, ICF has a number of other events coming up, particularly our summit in London, England, from June 4th to the 6th. We look forward to you participating. All of you are invited to participate in the Canadian delegation. And on March 1st, we're going to have another webinar on the economic case for municipal broadband. You're welcome to participate in that as well. I hope everyone had a good time. I know it was a long morning. Thank you, and goodbye, everyone. Bye for now.